Chapter 454, Opening the Furnace and Concocting Pills. Chapter 454, Opening the Furnace and Concocting Pills. Ling Han had indeed decided to certify as a heaven-grade alchemist on an impulse. An 18-year-old heaven-grade alchemist was too dazzling a presence. Furthermore, he had yet to build up his own power base. If some sect like the Winter Moon sect or the Beast Emperor sect secretly kidnapped and imprisoned him to force him to concoct alchemical pills, what was he to do? On the surface, there was indeed no one who would dare do anything damaging to a heaven-grade alchemist, but in secret, hehe. After all, in this whole world, there were only two heaven-grade alchemists. Ling Han possessed the Black Tower and it was indeed enough to allow him to protect himself, but if the secret of the Black Tower was leaked, he could possibly encounter even more trouble. Just look, hadn't the Thousand Corpse sect already taken note of him? However, for his father's sake, Ling Han chose to be rash. He definitely needed to obtain the 9-leaf black Ganoderma so that he could concoct the Restore Spirit pill. The problem now was, could he actually concoct heaven-grade alchemical pills? After all, he now only had a spiritual pedestal tier cultivation level, and in theory, the highest grade he could concoct would be earth-grade mid-level pills. With the strange fire thrown into the mix, earth-grade high-level pills should be no problem, but heaven-grade, it was a matter of chance. He could only hope that Small Fire had been terribly trained enough in the Black Tower and thus had a big power upgrade. Otherwise, there was really a chance he could fail. Losing face was not that important, but the important thing here would be that he would not be able to snatch back the 9-leaf black Ganoderma. Ling Han gathered his scattered thoughts and drew out a stalk of Spirit Heart Heaven Spring Bamboo from within the Black Tower. This was a spirit herb that could be used to concoct the most commonly seen Return Origin pill, which was used to replenish origin power. However, the Spring Heart Heaven Spring Bamboo was used to concoct a high-grade Return Origin pill. A 10-year-old herb could allow a spiritual infant tier cultivator to instantly recover 1/10 of his origin power. A 100-year-old one was effective for a deity transformation tier cultivator, whereas a 1,000-year-old herb could be used by a heaven tier cultivator. Ling Han obtained a 100-year-old Spirit Heart Heaven Spring Bamboo in the Devil Sky Mystery Realm which, after close to a year of growing in the Black Tower, had now reached 1,000 years old, and could now be used to concoct the highest grade Return Origin pill. An alchemical pill that was to be used by a heaven tier cultivator was naturally a heaven-grade alchemical pill. Though heaven-grade alchemical pills could also be categorized into low, mid, and high-level pills, because the pill grade was too high, heaven-grade low-level pills were directly referred to as heaven-grade. Heaven-grade mid-level pills were called saint-grade, and heaven-grade high-level pills were called immortal-grade. Saint-grade alchemical pills were effective for shattering void tier cultivators, whereas immortal-grade pills truly did not belong to this world. In his last life, Ling Han could concoct out saint-grade alchemical pills, and had touched a bit on immortal-grade alchemical pills as well. He had even found some substitute ingredients and managed to concoct pseudo-immortal grade alchemical pills, which also proved that his talent in alchemy was unparalleled in both ancient and modern times, and was extremely awesome. The name of Alchemy Emperor was not something that had come from mere praise, but had been obtained through genuine talent and skill. Those two heaven-grade alchemists of the middle state should be heaven-grade low-level alchemists. A great lapse in the passing down of alchemical knowledge had absolutely no relation with how prosperous the environment was for martial arts, and there was no way they could become saint-grade. Though heaven-grade Return Origin pill was the most common kind and most worthless heaven-grade alchemical pill, no matter how ordinary or trashy it was still a heaven-grade alchemical pill. It could not be concocted by any kind of earth-grade alchemist, and would be more than enough for him to pass the certification. More importantly, he did not have any other heaven-grade ingredients. Ling Han began to sort the ingredients. The Spirit Heart Heaven Spring Bamboo was the main ingredient, but other supplementary ingredients were needed as well. His movements were natural and smooth, making all those alchemsists who were observing him from outside dumbfounded. Sorting out ingredients could actually be done so elegantly, and actually seemed so beautiful. Zhu Xian'er's heart throbbed loudly. Though she had been called the greatest beauty of the North region, and one of the strongest of the younger generation, if you were to ask her if she could actually speak with a heaven-grade alchemist, then that would be mere fantasy for her. In the whole Middle State, there were only two heaven-grade alchemists, and their status could be considered to be on par with shattering void tier ultimate elites, was she qualified to converse with an ultimate elite cultivator of the shattering void tier? Of course not. Thus, Tang Zuming's threat and temptation was extremely effective. If she wanted to ask those two heaven-grade alchemists to concoct alchemical pills, making her request through their younger descendants was the most effective method. Otherwise, Zhu Xian'er could only wait until she had developed to the level that even heaven-grade alchemists would have to give her some face the shattering void tier. Setting aside the question whether Zhu Xian'er would be able to advance to the shattering void tier, even if she could, when would that be? But if Ling Han could successfully become a heaven-grade alchemist, Zhu Xian'er's heart throbbed uncontrollably. She should be considered Ling Han's friend, right? And since they were friends, then helping her out should not be anything too difficult for him, right? In this moment, she hoped tremendously that Ling Han could succeed. Tang Zuming sneered. There were a total of 27 Earth-grade high-level alchemists in the middle state, and they have been barraging the doorstep to become a heaven-grade alchemist for a whole 100 years, but ultimately, none managed to take this final step. What was the reason for that? That one step was much, much too hard to breach. An 18-year-old youngster wanted to succeed. That was really much too naive of him. However, he was still quite astonished by Ling Han's movements, because he, too, was a genius alchemist who was already a black-grade high-level alchemist in his mere 20s, which was proof enough of his extraordinary talent in alchemy. Ling Han's movements were much too practiced, and made him feel inferior. He even had the thought to stealthily learn, but looking at how his movements seemed blurred to the eye, he had absolutely no idea where to begin stealthily learning from. At first, it was quite noisy, but an absolute silence had fallen over them all in this moment. They were all watching Ling Han quietly. The rhythm of his movements actually caused a powerful resonance to arise in all of them, as if something was about to gush out from within their bodies. After sorting the ingredients, Ling Han entered into the purification stage. Those amazing movements of his naturally caused his audience to be shocked and stunned, and quite a number even exclaimed in surprise, but they were quickly silenced by multiple disdainful looks from their companions. The most important stage was here, and that was the pill concoction stage. No matter how beautifully you sorted the ingredients, or how amazingly you had purified them, if you were not able to concoct the alchemical pill, then everything would be worthless. Ling Han sharpened his focus and calmed his emotions. Then he summoned the strange fire and thought, "Small fire, it's up to you now." Hong, a crimson-red flame suddenly arose. If one looked closely enough, there was actually a small spot of purple in the heart of the flame, making it appear out of the ordinary. Ling Han was surprised. Small fire was indeed very different from before. Compared to how it was early on, after small fire swallowed another strange fire, there would indeed be a great power upgrade, but the greater change should have originated from being upgraded by the Black Tower, making it really experience a true rebirth. Heaven-grade alchemical pill, there was hope. The flames roared fiercely, and the light of the fire shone brilliantly. No way, to use such a powerful flame right from the very beginning, isn't he afraid that he would lose control? That's right, the furnace could explode at any moment. Immediately, a great number of people began to shake their heads. Ling Han's skill in sorting out the ingredients and purifying them made them feel ashamed of their inferiority, but his skill in pill concoction, it was really a bit poor. Such a person managed to become an Earth-grade alchemist too? Probably mere boasting. Though many aged, serious-looking elders did not say a thing, their eyes revealed their disappointment. At first, they had really thought that Ling Han was slightly assured of his success based on how aggressive and confident he had been. They had never thought that it was a mere show of false bravado from him. The latter was only a youngster, so why had they, for some unknown reason, placed their faith in him? What a joke! The furnace fire burned fiercely, reaching all the way to ceiling, forcing Ling Han to have no choice but to activate his thunder battle armor to withstand such extreme heat. 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, time passed extremely quickly. So much time has already passed, but why has the furnace not exploded yet? That's right, it's at least been 3 hours, so shouldn't it have long since exploded? Could it be that there is some hope for success? Impossible. I would guess that the ingredients he used were not heaven grade in the first place, and he is simply concocting a false heaven-grade alchemical pill. Hey, hey, hey. He couldn't have been so reckless, could he? The spectators all discussed spiritedly, whereas Tang Zuming simply broke out into uproarious laughter. How could heaven-grade alchemical pills be so easily concocted? Ling Han must have failed early on, and was merely adamant on not admitting his defeat now. He had to be merely putting on a farce now for the sake of his pride. Chapter 455 Appearance of the Pill Tribulation. Chapter 455 Appearance of the Pill Tribulation. Another 3 hours passed. Lord Gongyang, what are we to do? Someone asked Gongyang Tai's son for guidance. What do you mean, what are we to do? Certification as a heaven-grade alchemist can last for 3 days and 3 nights. Only 6 hours have passed by now and you're asking me what we are to do. Could it be that you think that I will step out to stop him? Gongyang Tai's son huffed. That person smiled sheepishly as he thought, doesn't everyone already know that Ling Han had already failed? So what is the point of continuing to waste everyone's feelings? Let's go, let's go. There's nothing much to see here. That's right. Let's all just go back, embrace our wives, and sleep. You speak as if you actually have a wife. Pei, believe it or not, I'll embrace your wife and sleep. The crowds quickly dispersed, and there were only a few servants left behind outside. A spoilt young master like Tang Zuming naturally was short of patience. Otherwise, with a great-grandfather that was a heaven-grade alchemist, he might have already advanced into earth-grade by now. He released a yawn and said, Jiao Feng, stand guard here, I'm going to go back and sleep. Look closely, you must definitely not allow this brat to escape. The moment 3 days have passed, I want to personally kill him. Yes, young master. Zhuo Jiao Feng replied respectfully. Tang Zuming once again snickered in Zhu Xian'er's direction. He was sure that this beauty would very soon concede to his will and obediently undress herself before pleasing him on the bed. He could not help but shudder in anticipation, feeling slightly impatient. In fact, he wanted very much to immediately force himself upon her right this very instant. There was no need to rush. This beautiful creature was destined to be served up on his plate. 4 spiritual pedestal tier cultivators, as long as they had not engaged in fierce battle, it would be no problem for them to endure a wait that could last over 10 days and all the way up to half a month. Thus, Zhu Xian'er and Zhuo Jiao Feng both stood guard outside the alchemy chamber. Aside from the two of them, Elder Shi and Gongyang Tai's son were there as well, and together with a number of earth-grade alchemists, there were in total about 10 people still waiting. 1 day passed, 2 days passed, and Ling Han was still endlessly embroiled in the pill concoction process. Furthermore, more and more people had once again returned to the alchemy chamber. Ling Han appeared not to have failed yet. They could clearly see that while Ling Han was concocting the alchemical pills, he drew out multiple patterns from the alchemy furnace, and after making slight adjustments, shot them back onto the furnace. Those were the patterns that belonged to the various ingredients within the alchemy furnace, and carried with them the essence of nature which formed natural patterns. Pill concoction involved merging these various patterns in a specific way and, ultimately, creating a shocking effect from them. However, the manipulation of these patterns that belonged to the ingredients would only be used in the process of concocting a heaven-grade alchemical pill. When they saw how these patterns fluttered, as well as Ling Han's practiced, beautiful movements, all the alchemists felt their hair stand on ends in their extreme shock. This youngster was really concocting a heaven-grade alchemical pill. Crap. Furthermore, the furnace had not yet exploded even though 2 whole days had passed. Instead, the divinity and essence of the ingredients had been slowly extracted, and revealed the most intrinsic patterns. This showed that Ling Han was still proceeding smoothly and successfully up till this point. This WSS really too astonishing. Could it be that he would really succeed? All of them were unsure. In alchemy, the last part was the hardest to finish. No one could be sure whether it was successful if it was not the very last moment. If there was a mistake at any one stage, it could lead to a fatal failure. Moreover, the manipulation of patterns in order to ensure that the ingredients could interact and resonate with one another was the very hardest step in this lengthy process. One mistake and the whole endeavor would be a loss. However, in Ling Han's case, he was extremely relaxed by this point. He was the alchemy emperor. What level had he been at in his last life? Saint grade. He had even concocted pseudo-immortal grade alchemical pills, so it would not be an exaggeration to consider him to be a pseudo-immortal grade alchemist. The only thing he lacked was the ability to raise the maximum heat level of his flames, and aside from this, there was naturally nothing else he had left to fear. He moved confidently, his 10 fingers moving as if he was strumming the strings of a chine, so relaxed and smooth were his movements. One after another, patterns appeared, and he adjusted every single one of them before throwing them back into the alchemy furnace. The patterns corresponded to the changes in the medicinal effects of the contents of the alchemy furnace, and with his adjustment, they melded together and headed in the direction that he wanted them to go. Sometimes, Ling Han would even close his eyes, as if he had once again returned to his last life. Heaven-grade alchemical pills were a piece of cake, and saint-grade alchemical pills were no big issue, either. Considering the level that Ling Han had grasped alchemy in his last life, as long as he was given real immortal-grade alchemical pills, he might even be able to concoct immortal-grade alchemical pills. Hey! Did I see wrongly? Why do I feel like I saw him close his eyes just now? I saw that too. Fuck, is this guy a freak or something? He can actually be so inattentive even in the midst of concocting a heaven-grade alchemical pill? The spectators all erupted into a shocked clamor. They had really been astonished by Ling Han's actions. Ling Han's movements became increasingly skillful. He knew every step like it was the back of his hand. His fingers seemed to have a spirit of their own and twisted the unique nature of each ingredient easily, moving in a relaxed and pleasurable manner. As the time limit for the 3 days neared, more and more patterns steamed out of the alchemy furnace. Merely a glance was enough to turn the faces of the earth-grade alchemists green, yet Ling Han was absolutely unconcerned. The movements of his hands sped up correspondingly in an organized, amazingly calm manner. Tang Zuming had once again returned, and when he saw this scene, he could not help but wear a dark expression. Even if Ling Han failed in his next step, this kind of standard was really close to heaven grade. An 18-year-old quasi-heaven grade alchemist, that was too horrifying. Finally, Ling Han had forced back every single pattern into the alchemy furnace, and no other emerged. The time was also close to the end of the 3-day-long process. Suddenly a dark cloud appeared in the middle of what had been clear skies. There had been absolutely no warning, and within the cloud, lightning flashed closely together, making a loud crackling noise. It's said that when a heaven-grade alchemical pill has been successfully concocted, a thunder tribulation would befall it so as to prevent it from leaving the alchemy furnace. This means that Ling Han has really concocted heaven-grade alchemical pills? Otherwise, how could he have possibly drawn out a calamity of thunder? However, this is also the very hardest step. If the alchemical pills concocted are not up to standard, then they would be turned to ash by this thunder tribulation. But if they were up to standard, they would absorb the power of heaven's Tao in it and truly come to possess heaven-grade effects. If a deity transformation tier cultivator swallowed a heaven-grade alchemical pill, even he would explode and die. There would be no way he could withstand the power of heaven's Tao. But, will we be affected by the thunder tribulation too? All their expressions turned a bit dark. They had never before experienced it. They had never even witnessed one actually taking place. They had only heard of its occurrence through hearsay. Retreat. Gongyang Tai Sun's expression changed drastically. As an earth-grade mid-level alchemist, he was naturally aware that the moment a heaven-grade alchemical pill left the alchemy furnace, a thunder tribulation would be drawn out. That was not something to play around with. All of them hurriedly fled in all directions. Everyone was now sure by now that Ling Han was indeed concocting heaven-grade alchemical pills. Otherwise, there was no way he would have drawn out a thunder tribulation. Then as long as the alchemical pill withstood it, Ling Han would be a genuine heaven-grade alchemist. Even if it did not manage to withstand the might of thunder, he was still qualified to be considered a quasi-heaven-grade alchemist. Elder Shi and Zhuo Jiaofeng's faces turned slightly green. Though one of them was in the spiritual infant tier while the other was in flower blossom tier, if they really opposed a heaven-grade alchemist, at any instant, others could tear them apart into multiple pieces so small that not even bones remained. There was a great number of people who would beg a heaven-grade alchemist to concoct alchemical pills for them, and there was no shortage of ultimate elites like those in the heaven tier and the deity transformation tier. In front of these true elites, what could the spiritual infant tier count as? Even if there was a restriction in place to stop them, and the deity transformation tier cultivators would be greatly weakened if they made their way here, as long as Linghan gave a holler, it was guaranteed that all the spiritual infant tier cultivators in the whole North region would obey him. He did not have to be a heaven-grade alchemist. Being a quasi-heaven-grade alchemist was enough. That was because spiritual infant tier cultivators had no need of heaven-grade alchemical pills anyways, as earth-grade alchemical pills would be more than enough. Chapter 456, Heaven-grade Alchemist, Linghan. Chapter 456, Heaven-grade Alchemist, Linghan. Tang Zuming could feel his facial muscles twitch madly too. He knew that even if Linghan failed, there was definitely no one who would dare to touch a quasi-heaven-grade alchemist. Even if his great-grandfather was here, he would think highly of Linghan as well. An 18-year-old quasi-heaven-grade alchemist, was he still far off from becoming a true heaven-grade alchemist? Why was there such a freak in this world? How was anyone else supposed to live when he set such a high standard? Only Zhu Xian'er's beautiful eyes shone brightly. She knew that Linghan possessed extraordinary talent in alchemy, but had never imagined that he would really be able to become a heaven-grade alchemist. This was a colossal pleasant shock for her. Peng. Linghan simply picked up the alchemy furnace and walked out. With a sweep of his eyes, he discovered an empty public square and hurriedly raced there. Everyone knew that he intended to have the alchemical pills withstand the calamity of thunder there, and thus gathered around it and stood firmly to watch. Linghan reached his destination. His right hand suddenly opened the lid of the alchemy furnace and 3 jade-green immediately pills shot out of the furnace and fled in different directions as if they had a life of their own. But it was precisely at this moment that the thunder tribulation took place, without any prior warning at all. Quang! 3 bolts of lightning struck at the same time. They struck the 3 alchemical pills, and pa, all 3 alchemical pills immediately fell down from midair. Linghan moved swiftly and caught each of them. However, one of them had been directly turned into ash, and only 2 fell into his hands. This was the most ordinary return origin pill, and had thus attracted the most ordinary kind of thunder tribulation. 1 strike and it was over. When Linghan had concocted pseudo-immortal grade alchemical pills in his last life, he had actually drawn out a 9-colored divine lightning that almost spread to him even. When he recalled it even at this moment, he could still feel his heart speed up quickly and turn ashen pale in terror. He gripped the 2 return origin pills in his hands and raised them high. The alchemical pills had not turned into ash. He had succeeded. Gods, an 18-year-old heaven-grade alchemist. Though no one knew what kind of alchemical pill Linghan had concocted, knowing that these 2 pills were heaven-grade alchemical pills was enough for them. Respectful greetings, Grandmaster Ling. All the alchemists knelt. Even Gongyang Tai's son was no exception, a fire flickering in his eyes. Gods, finally, a heaven-grade alchemist had emerged from the North region. Moreover, it was a record-breaking 18-year-old youngster. Who could compare to that kind of achievement at any time in history? Even that Linghan who had been acclaimed as the alchemy emperor 10,000 years ago would have to admit defeat in face of such an outstanding feat. How strange, the 2 geniuses of alchemy from 2 different generations were actually both named Linghan. What an astonishing coincidence. Elder She knelt. Zhuojiao Feng hesitated slightly before he, too, knelt. Only Tang Zuming was shaking in fear. Gods, he had actually commanded someone to hunt down and kill a heaven-grade alchemist. Even if his great-grandfather was here, there was no way he could save him. He was done for. He was finished. He was so terrified that his knees were shaking. He wanted to flee back to the middle state, hide in the Tang residence, and never leave, but it was as if his feet weighed 10,000 pounds. He could not take a single step at all. Linghan casually stored away the 2 return origin pills. He would not be able to sell them at all in the North region. He would have to wait until he went to the other 3 regions or the Middle State and see. He strode towards Tang Zuming, scaring him so much that he shivered even more violently. At this moment, even if Linghan struck him dead where he was standing, it was guaranteed that no one would dare to say a word in objection. In this whole world and era, the only people who would be able to exert some form of control over Ling Han would be the other two heaven-grade alchemists. However, they were both in the middle state, too far to be able to help. Pa. Tang Zuming knelt down and sobbed. Please spare me, Grandmaster Ling. I beg you to spare me, Grandmaster Ling. After tossing and turning restlessly, he could only come up with this phrase. He was truly so terrified that he was completely out of his wits. Ling Han rushed forth and immediately gave him a thrashing. This also meant that he had no intention to commit murder. Otherwise, why would he have gone to so much trouble? If he really wanted to kill Tang Zuming, he needed only wave his sword and it was done. However, this was possibly a descendant of his disciple, so he decided to educate him properly. Everyone else was struck dumb. Who would have imagined that a noble, prestigious heaven-grade alchemist would actually be so violent? He had actually gone ahead and thrashed Tang Zuming in public openly. What was the difference between his actions and those of a common thug, then? The imposing image that Ling Han had just established collapsed instantly. Of course, his deterrent force as a heaven-grade alchemist did not lessen in the slightest. He was still an existence that they could all only gaze up at in admiration and reverence. When he was finally satisfied with his thrashing, Ling Han stopped and declared, "The 9-leaf black Ganoderma, hand it over." Tang Zuming was stunned at first. Then he realized that he was still alive. And he was no idiot. He had merely been scared stupid just now. Now that he thought about it, since Ling Han was willing to beat him up, that meant that Ling Han did not intend to kill him. He could not help but feel a great joy for getting a new lease of life. He quickly took out the 9-leaf black Ganoderma from his spatial ring and handed it over to Ling Han. He then said, "I'm sorry, Grandmaster Ling. Because this is a necessary ingredient in one of the alchemical pills that my great-grandfather is in the midst of concocting, I had brought it over." It's not rare for you to use your great-grandfather's name, is it? Ling Han asked coldly. Tang Zuming's heart shook. He could hear the displeasure in Ling Han's voice and quickly assured, "I will definitely change my habits, I won't do it again." Ling Han humphed and shot out a finger which pressed down on Tang Zuming's dantian. "Grandmaster Ling, what did you do to me?" Tang Zuming asked hurriedly. He did not feel anything odd happen in his body, but absolutely did not believe that Ling Han would give him a tap for no reason. Ling Han smiled calmly and said, "I just made you unable to be a man." "Ah!" Tang Zuming screeched shrilly. He was incredibly fond of womanly charms, so if he'd lost his ability as a man, then what was left for him to live for? "No," he cried in incredible grief. "No. No. No. I want to be a man. I want to be a man." "Shut up." Ling Han gave him a slap. "It would not be difficult for you to return to being a man, but that would depend on your future performance." Tang Zuming nodded his head repeatedly like pounding a stalk of scallion repeatedly, and said, "I will definitely perform well. I will definitely perform very well." Ling Han nodded and said, "Then we'll see." Tang Zuming could not help but be disappointed. He naturally hoped to immediately regain his ability as a man, but could he actually force Ling Han to release the restriction on him? He wanted to weep but had no tears. If he had known this would happen, he should have fled back to the middle state 2 days ago. He would not have clashed with Ling Han, either. Who would have thought that Ling Han would actually put up such an elaborate pretense? He obviously had the genuine skill of heaven grade, yet humbly remained in the position of an earth grade low-level alchemist, causing him to kick such an extremely huge iron sheet. He was now feeling so horribly wronged. However, at this moment, he dared not to make the smallest complaint. The only thing he could do now was to stand seriously and obediently. Since Ling had obtained the 9-leaf black Ganoderma, he was naturally in a very good mood. He said, "I'm leaving." Then he turned, planning to walk out of the North Pill Pavilion. Grandmaster Ling, innumerable alchemists gathered around him. Gods, they had never even seen a heaven-grade alchemist, so they naturally had to admire him for a few moments longer. Meanwhile, Elder Shi and Zhuo Jiaofeng were both kneeling in front of Ling Han, asking for pardon respectively. "Grandmaster Ling, please forgive our previous lack in manners. Neither of them placed any importance on their pride or reputation and directly began to slap themselves severely. There was nothing else they could do. This was a heaven-grade alchemist. In the whole world, there were only 3, and their status was on par with ultimate elites of the shattering void tier. Who would dare offend such an existence? Ling Han was irritated and said, "Don't follow me, I still have things to do. As for you two, head to my restaurant and work for a month. If you perform well, I will forget what has happened a few days ago. If you do not, hey, we will definitely perform well." Elder Shi and Zhuo Jiao Feng declared simultaneously, their expressions filled with pleasant surprise. Chapter 457 Arrangements for Various Matters. Chapter 457 Arrangements for Various Matters. Darkangel_ Forget Not created another record. Previously, there were 2 members of the Prodigy role working in the restaurant, and this had already led to a very big commotion because those people on the Prodigy role were definitely going to advance to the Flower Blossom tier. Yet now, not only was there a strong elite of the Flower Blossom tier willingly here to work as a waiter, there was even a mighty elite of the Spiritual Infant tier who did not mind doing such menial tasks like serving food and drinks. That was the Spiritual Infant tier they were talking about here, an existence at the very apex of martial arts in the North region. Now, who would dare create trouble in Forget Not? Even the Thousand Corpse sect would have some reservations, right? Could they lose everything in one go without any rewards and suffer a double loss after trying to harm their foe? Not just the 2 of them, Tang Zuming had also docilely came here to work, and his identity was very soon known, a black-grade high-level alchemist, and moreover, the direct descendant of one of the 2 heaven-grade alchemists of the Central Prefecture, Tang Zisha. Fuck. When they heard that information, everyone could not help but exclaim in their extreme shock. This was somewhat even more shocking and astonishing than a powerful elite of the Spiritual Infant tier working as a waiter. What kind of noble, prestigious status did the young master of the Tang clan possess? It could be claimed that even in the well-known 3 great sects and single valley of the North region, he could do as he liked. Even powerful Spiritual Infant tier cultivators would have to bow their heads in deference to him, but now? He was obediently working as a waiter. Fuck. Yet Ling Han was completely uninterested in all of this. He had initially planned to rush back to the Rain Country, but the 12 Heaven Mystery Realms were about to open very soon, and he had managed to obtain the key to the Sagittarius Palace Hall. If he missed this chance, then he would have to wait another 100 years. After much consideration, he decided to concoct the Restore Spirit pill first, then have someone send it back to the Rain Country so that Ling Dongxing could heal his spirit base. He would then make a trip home after he came out of the Mystery Realms. Furthermore, now that he had regained the status of a heaven-grade alchemist, he naturally should not waste it. He immediately wrote a letter which he sent back to the Winter Moon sect to request them to release his mother. Of course, he would not say that Yu Hongchang was his mother, to prevent some people like the Ao clan getting dangerous ideas to make use of Yu Hongchang to exert some control over him. He only requested them to release her in a forceful manner, and demanded for her to be brought to Extreme Yang City where she would be sent to live temporarily in the North Pill Pavilion. He did not offer any reason at all. So what if he didn't? I am a heaven-grade alchemist, and I am really as willful as that, so what can you do about it? It would take about a month's time from the moment that the 12 Heaven Mystery Realms appeared out of thin air until the moment that others could officially enter. By now, more than a dozen days had passed, and after another dozen over days, it would be completely open. However, in these dozen over days, Ling Han was extremely vexed. All the alchemists in the North Pill Pavilion saw him as their idol, and every single one of them was a fanatic who came every single day to pay their respectful greetings. It was all right even if they were not able to see him personally. They would definitely still kneel down outside and pay their respects. They already thought of Ling Han as the object of their faith and a totem for them to revere. With so many people coming to pay their respects, naturally, the news could not be kept secret forever. The residents of Extreme Yang City finally found out that the owner of Forget Not an Alchemist King Pavilion was actually a newly advanced heaven-grade alchemist. No wonder there were so many important people racing there to work, and no wonder that the Alchemist King Pavilion would make such a boast. Could a heaven-grade alchemist still not be claimed as a king? For Ji De Rong and Shui Jiu Cheng, they no longer considered the matter of them working at Forget Not a disgrace. On the other hand, this had become a source of pride for them. Just take a look, the two of us were the first cultivators to work at Forget Not, and that was even sooner than any cultivator of the spiritual infant tier or the flower blossom tier. In terms of hierarchy, those two would have to address them as senior apprentice brothers. Ling Han was actually quite free. He had already concocted the Restore Spirit pill and especially requested Liu Ji Tong to run this errand. With an Earth-grade low-level alchemist by his side to take care of him, there would definitely be no problems in Ling Dongxing's recovery process. Gongyang Tai Sun even personally made a trip to the Winter Moon sect. With an Earth-grade mid-level alchemist present, as well as the written decree of a Heaven-grade alchemist, he did not believe that the Winter Moon sect would purposely delay matters and refuse to release his mother. He was spending every day studying the Tianju Heaven Star Array. By drawing parallels through inference, he felt that it should facilitate his sword skills. Young Master Han, Miss Zhu Xian requests an audience with you. Ling Han had just been deducing the Tao of the array in the courtyard when Zhu Wuzhu knocked on the door and announced his guest in a low voice. Ling Han hesitated slightly, then said, "Let her come in." "Yes." Zhu Wuzhu replied, then left. Actually, if it was any other person, he would definitely not come and inform Ling Han. However, Zhu Xian was the greatest beauty of the North region, and he truly hoped that she could become Ling Han's wife. Only the greatest beauty of the North region would be qualified to stand beside a man like Ling Han, after all. After a moment, a light knock sounded on the courtyard doors again, and two people entered. Zhu Xian as well as Zhu Longxing. The Zhu Xian now had not even a little bit of arrogance left in her attitude. She could not help but bow her head and maintain a submissive posture, looking very well behaved. "Xian pays my respects to Grandmaster Ling." Zhu Xian lowered her body and paid her respects. Her white skirts spread out as she lowered into a bow, as if she was an exquisite fresh flower that was blooming. Zhu Longxing hurriedly bowed in respect as well, and said, "My respectful greetings, young Master Han." Ling Han raised his hand, and asked, "What's the matter?" He did not have any time he could waste. "Grandmaster Ling, can you help Xian concoct the subduing Tiger Heaven fortune pill?" Zhu Xian directed a very hopeful look at Ling Han. "I can," Ling Han agreed quite quickly. "As long as you can get me the ingredients, and I'll offer you a friends-only price. A level 9 spirit tool should be enough as my fee, or 10 level 8 spirit tools would be acceptable too. However, in the case of level 7 spirit tools, I would like at least 1,000 of them." Zhu Xian's face had turned completely pale. Even if she was the greatest beauty of the North region, if she really sold herself, would she actually manage to get a level 9 spirit tool in exchange? "Haha, I was just joking. No matter what, we're friends, after all, so just get me the ingredients," Ling Han said with a grin. Zhu Xian breathed out in relief, but her face was still extremely troubled. Though the fee for pill concoction was waived, the subduing Tiger Heaven fortune pill needed a total of 3 heaven-grade ingredients, and they were not that much cheaper than a level 9 spirit tool. How could a mere spiritual pedestal tier cultivator like her get her hands on them? "Grandmaster Ling, you are a heaven-grade alchemist, so you should have some means to obtain those 3 main ingredients, right?" she probed. Ling Han humphed and said, "Have you been spoilt rotten by others? Do I have any kind of relationship with you? Why must I help you? You are indeed quite pretty, but that is all there is. Don't think all in this world are fools." With such a harsh rebuke from Ling Han, Zhu Xian could feel herself instantly tear up. She had never thought that being beautiful was something she should be happy about. If it wasn't for the fact that she possessed extraordinary talent in martial arts, she would definitely have long become someone's toy to be played around with as they liked. But in front of such a forceful young master like Tang Zuming, she felt very helpless, because the former could easily grip her weakness, and could even use forceful means to obtain her body. Not everyone was as gentlemanly as Yarrow Hui Yu. There was indeed no one who would dare to do anything to her in the North region, but the whole world did not merely consist of the North region. "Grandmaster Ling," she looked at Ling Han miserably, her beautiful eyes delicate and sad. Even a heart of stone would melt for her. However, Ling Han's martial intent was even sturdier than iron. His heart did not soften in the slightest. He merely continued to stare coolly at this genius beauty. Zhu Xian'er gritted her teeth and said, "Xian'er knows what to do now." Then, she actually turned around and left. Yet Ling Han was a little confused. What did she know? But who cares? "Yi, why haven't you left yet?" He swept a glance over Zhu Longxing. Zhu Longxing leaned close, and said with a bootlicking expression, "Hey, brother-in-law." Pu, Ling Han instantly spat out a mouthful of water all over his face. Zhu Longxing stuck close to Ling Han like he was a piece of sticky candy, and no matter what was done, he refused to be driven off, making Ling Han very vexed. He could kill him, but Zhu Longxing had not done anything bad. He had merely called Ling Han brother-in-law a few times, and that was not an insult. Ling Han sighed and asked, "What will make you stop calling me brother-in-law?" "Brother-in-law, just marry my sister. My sister is definitely the best woman in this whole world. Not only is she gentle and kind, she is also the greatest beauty in the world." "Brother-in-law, marrying her is definitely not a loss," Zhu Longxing cajoled. Ling Han looked at Zhu Longxing, smiled, and said, "Whoever calls you a fool must definitely be a fool himself." As someone who had lived 2 lifetimes, he was naturally aware what kind of plans Zhu Longxing had in mind. Zhu Long smiled modestly, making sure his attitude was as humble as possible. No matter what, he would definitely not miss out on this wonderful match. On the second day, unexpectedly, Zhu Xian'er actually went to forget not and took the initiative to do menial tasks like serving dishes and wine. This immediately made forget not an even greater focus point of attention, especially when it was already the source of much commotion in the first place. The greatest beauty of the North region was actually here to work as a waitress as well. Forget not that was already crowded to bursting point in the first place instantly experienced an upgrade in the length of the queues waiting outside. It could not be denied, the attraction level of a beautiful woman instantly defeated any spiritual infant tier or flower blossom tier cultivator. At least, there had not been so many customers attracted by the spectacle of Elder Shi and Zhuojiao Feng working as waiters. Ling Han was surprised. So this was the realization that Zhu Xian'er had come to be a waitress. He really could not comprehend the logic of women. There was no word to describe the charm of Zhu Xian'er. Merely 2 or 3 days had passed, and Zhu Wuzhu, Can Yi, and Guang Yuan had all become her solid supporters. Even Liu Yutong and Li Sai-chan had been won over, and they completely did not treat her like an outsider. There was no need to mention Zhu Longxing, of course. He was completely a self-proclaimed brother-in-law, his skin was thick enough that no arrow would be able to pierce through. By now, only Hu Niu was in the same camp with Ling Han. This little girl had never had any fondness for Zhu Xian'er, and she was even more displeased at the sight of her now. She would always bare her little white teeth at the latter as if she wanted to pounce and take a bite out of her. The day that the 12 heaven mystery realms would open was getting nearer and nearer. Thus, Ling Han brought all the members of his group and set off. Zhu Xian'er was naturally traveling alongside them as well. She seemed to have inherited her younger brother's thick skin too, and did not feel that there was anything strange in this arrangement. The site where the 12 heaven mystery realms would open was located 10,000 miles east of Extreme Yang City, and taking Ling Han's speed into account, it was a trip of about 4 days. The group hired 2 carriages in total, the men would be in one, and the women would be in the other. Initially, Ling Han would definitely have sat with Liu Yutong and the others, but because there was Zhu Xian'er present this time, he chose to sit with Can Yi and the other men because he would be able to use the Black Tower without Zhu Xian'er's knowledge. On their way there, it was inevitable that they would encounter robbers and thieves, but either one of Zhu Wuzhu, Guang Yuan, or Can Yi stepped out each time and the matter was resolved. They would easily thrash any band of thieves to utter, absolute defeat. After 4 days, they arrived at the Martial Jiu Valley. By now, a great number of cultivators had arrived as well. They had set up tents outside the valley, and were currently waiting for the mystery realms to open. This valley was very mysterious. It was hidden all year round by an endless fog. Anyone who stepped in would definitely lose all sense of direction, and thus be trapped within until their death. Only in the month prior to the day that the mystery realms opened would the fog that surrounded this place disappear, The entrance to the mystery realms was in the deepest parts of the valley. Thus, it was very simple to check whether the mystery realms had opened. One only needed send out some people to stand guard outside the valley's entrance, and observe whether the fog had dispersed yet. Fairy Ju. When they saw Zhu Xian'er disembark from the carriage, at least over 100 young men rushed over. Every one of them had eyes that shone brightly, looking very fanatical. The title of the greatest beauty of the North region was not something that had come from empty praises. Zhu Xian'er was obviously used to this kind of situation. She smoothly responded, both elegant and cool, ensuring that everyone would not feel that they were able to approach her, yet she would not cause anyone to feel bad. Her graceful bearing as a goddess was on full display. Ha ha ha, I have long heard that there is magnificent beauty in the North region. Indeed, it is a fully justified reputation. A young man strode out of the masses. He was only in his early 20s, with a tall height and long legs, as well as handsome and clean-cut features. He looked too dashing to be described by mere words. And what was more shocking was the fact that there was actually a pair of wings of light behind him that would spread out occasionally. With a light flap, the aura that emanated was extraordinarily overbearing. He strode over, and those on either side could not help but feel their spirits shake, and unable to stop themselves, knelt down. Chapter 459 East Region's Prodigy. Chapter 459 East Region's Prodigy. Reverie _ This person was like a god spirit that descended to earth, his presence shocking. He was clearly only a spiritual pedestal tier warrior, but as his martial intent spread, its deterrence power was almost equal to that of the flower blossom tier. Behind him, several beautiful female martial artists held their cheeks, their gazes full of stars as they couldn't help but scream, appearing infatuated. He took large strides, arriving before Zhu Xian'er. The corner of his mouth quirked up, revealing a smile that would drive people crazy as he said, "Zhu Xian'er, take off the veil, let me see if you're qualified to be my bride. So handsome. So assertive. Wen Yi Jian, marry me, I am willing to be your bride." Quite a few female martial artists screamed, extremely fanatical. Zhu Xian'er's pretty face turned cold. As her gaze swept by Ling Han, she said indifferently, "Xian'er already regards Ling Han as master. As long as young Master Han agrees, Xian'er will naturally take off the veil." In other words, it meant that if Ling Han disagreed, then you can take a hike. What? As those words were said, everyone was stirred up. The girls were naturally indignant that Zhu Xian'er actually rejected such a super handsome man, and the men's eyes were red with envy. Regards Ling Han as master, what did that mean? Did you offer both your body and mind? In that moment, countless gazes that wished to kill all targeted Ling Han. If gazes were like swords, Ling Han would definitely have been slashed into shreds, and if gazes were like fire, Ling Han would definitely have been burned into ashes. Haha, you're that young Master Ling? The godlike youngster's gaze focused on Ling Han as he revealed a smile of disdain. I'm called Wen Yi Jian, and the future world's #1 sword. Haha, Middle State has some idiot self-proclaimed world's second sword. Luckily, he didn't call himself the first sword, or else I'll definitely let him know what's called the way of the sword. So handsome. Hearing those bold words, many girls were smitten once again. Ling Han smiled indifferently and said, "Yarrow Hui, you certainly has the right to be called the world's second sword in the future, but as for you, I only see lowliness, and whether or not you can become the world's lowliest, that'll depend on how hard you try." Wen Yi Jian's expression immediately turned grim. He said, "You dare insult me?" "Insult you? I don't think so, I've only told truth as it is." Ling Han shrugged his shoulders. Wen Yi Jian laughed boisterously, facing the sky, and said, "In this world, no one can insult me." "Oh, you really think you're something?" Ling Han said with disdain. He originally had no interest in paying attention to such a person with exploding confidence, but Wen Yi Jian asked for trouble. "Apologize to me. If I'm satisfied, I'll just cripple one of your arms," Wen Yi Jian said loftily. Ling Han uttered an "oh" and said, "Judging by your tone, you don't seem to be from the North region." "No kidding, how could North region possibly have such a genius like me? I am East region's #1 genius in the way of the sword," Wen Yi Jian said without a shred of modesty. As his gaze swept by, seeing many men reveal infuriated expressions, he couldn't help but sneer. What, not convinced? Then bring it on, I can beat you till you guys are convinced, starting from you. As he said the last words, he stared at Ling Han again. You don't even have the right to fight with Master Ling. A white-clothed figure came in a flash. It was Shenzhong Cheng. I'll defeat you. White-robed Sword King. The 8th place on the prodigy roll. White-robed Sword King, mess up that asshole from the East region. Many men began shouting, as Wen Yijian's arrogance already incited the public's anger. Of course, another person also became the public enemy, which obviously referred to Ling Han. However, quite a few people had already heard that Ling Han became a heaven-grade alchemist, and at least on the surface, who dared to pick a fight with one? Wen Yijian was somewhat astounded, looking at Ling Han as he said, "You're also some master? Don't you get frightened when I tell you?" Ling Han smiled slightly. "Haha, what master could frighten me?" Wen Yijian said with disdain. "You're at most a high-level Earth-grade alchemist. Although in terms of your age segment, this is already very impressive." Ha 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 ha. The entire place was instantly filled with laughter. Wen Yijian was baffled by the laughs and said balefully, "Were my words that funny? Idiot, young Master Ling is a heaven-grade alchemist." Zhu Wuju yelled out. Ha 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 ha. This time, Wen Yijian burst into laughter, almost laughing to the point of tears. Wasn't this funny? Who didn't know that there were only 2 heaven-grade alchemists in all of the vast lands? But these 2 have diligently studied alchemy for countless years, so how could it possibly be the immature youngster before him became one as well? However, after he laughed for a while, he found that no one joined him, and all glanced at him as if looking at a fool, except for a few of the beauties that still had fanaticism in their gaze. Master Ling certainly is a heaven-grade alchemist, which the entire world reveres. An old man opened up. He was utmost Imperial Sect's Flower Blossom tier elite, who specially escorted the sect's disciples in entering the mystery realm. Great Sorrow Sect's Flower Blossom tier elite also said, "That's right, Master Ling is North Region's most distinguished genius, like no other. Respects to Master Ling." The Flower Blossom tier warriors at the scene paid obeisance to Ling Han one after another. Alchemy and martial arts were not the same domain but were linked in countless ways. If not for Ling Han's low cultivation, these Flower Blossom tier warriors would have to kneel to pay their respects. Ling Han simply raised his hand, appearing composed. He'd seen these occasions many times in his previous life, so he naturally wouldn't be flustered. Wen Yijian was finally greatly shocked. One Flower Blossom tier warrior could be Muddlehead, but it was definitely impossible that several hundreds of Flower Blossom tier martial artists all had strokes. Hiss, the youngster before him was truly a heaven-grade alchemist. Holy shit, that was way too young. Alchemists had status beyond the norm, and even if you had no requests for one, you definitely couldn't offend them. Because offending an alchemist, especially a high-tier alchemist, meant many people would volunteer to stick up for the alchemist without the latter even asking. If word got out that he, Wen Yijian, was so frivolous towards a heaven-grade alchemist, then would there still be a place for him in the entire world? Wen Yijian was proud but not stupid, so he immediately lowered his arrogant head and said, "This lowly one didn't recognize Master Ling." "I beg your pardon, Master Ling." Ling Han smiled slightly and said, "I'm actually not some heaven-grade alchemist, just a small martial artist." "Weren't you going to teach me a lesson? Come, let's fight to our heart's content." "Like hell, you think I'm stupid?" No way Wen Yijian would believe that several hundred Flower Blossom tier warriors would cooperate in acting with Ling Han, who was a mere spiritual pedestal tier. Was that possible? He laughed dryly and said, "Master Ling sure knows how to joke." He was also an extremely slick person, not stumped at all by Ling Han's words. "Wen Yijian, come fight." Shenzhong Cheng, however, was full of fighting spirit. He was also a sword user, and seeing a sword expert, he couldn't help but want to spar a bit. Wen Yijian just kicked an iron plate and was very embarrassed, so he naturally would want to regain face. Snorting at once, he said, "Since you want to be defeated so badly, I'll fulfill your wish." Chapter 460, The Powerful Wen Yijian. Chapter 460, The powerful Wen Yi Jian. Reverie _ Shenzhong Cheng spoke no more superfluous words, directly thrusting his sword. Hong, he drove the sword towards Wen Yi Jian as if the thing driven wasn't a sword, but a mountain of swords, giving people a feeling of extreme heaviness. If pierced by this word, one would definitely be smashed into pieces. This was White-Robed Sword King's martial intent and belonged to his own way of the sword. Ling Han nodded inwardly. This younger generation already walked down a path that belonged to themselves. It was no wonder that it was said people on the prodigy roll could definitely become flower blossom tier warriors. Each one was certainly out of the ordinary. Wen Yi Jian's expression, however, was full of disdain, and he unconcernedly pointed with a finger as a powerful sword intent circulated and a flash of sword light flashed. Hong, behind him 2 wings of light fluttered gently, making him seem like a god descending to earth. Peng! With the point of a finger, Shenzhong Chong was immediately sent flying and the long sword almost slipped out of his hand, yet he caught it forcibly as blood splattered from his perlicue, and even the skin ruptured, looking extremely tragic. Everyone was greatly shocked. That was Shenzhong Cheng, the White-Robed Sword King, the 29th place on the prodigy roll last year and this year's top 10, enough to represent those with the strongest battle prowess in North Region's younger generation. However, he was defeated in a single blow, and by only a finger. Hiss, the difference was way too great. Everyone knew that with the 4 regions, Middle State's martial arts level was the highest, and the North region was the lowest of the 4 regions, without even deity transformation tier elites. However, did the younger generation also had such a great difference? Clearly, Wen Yi Jian was also in the spiritual pedestal tier, and even if he was at the 9th layer of the spiritual pedestal tier, the gap shouldn't be so wide. You're no good. Wen Yi Jian shook his head and said, if you cultivate diligently till the 9th layer of the spiritual pedestal tier, becoming the same as me, then you would be barely qualified for me to use my sword. However, I'm truly a bit disappointed that this is your so-called genius on the prodigy roll, and ranked number 8. FCK, mocking crowd again. Hee, brother Wen, then let me battle you. Yang Junhao walked out, battle intent burning in his gaze. Wen Yi Jian glanced at him once and said, you have some strength, and are about the same age and cultivation as me, which means you're satisfactorily gifted. However, with the same martial arts tier, that only represents that our power is close, but power is only a part of battle prowess. You mean, although our tiers are the same, your battle prowess is far above mine? Yang Hao Jun said indifferently, but in his tone was an obvious fury. That's only natural. Wen Yi Jian said as if it was a matter of fact. I sure want to see for myself. Yang Junhao laughed instead of being angered. He shook his hand and unleashed his long sword. This was a spirit tool, entirely crimson red, and covered with vein-like lines. I'll let you have 3 moves and defeat you in 1, Wen Yi Jian said loftily, sweeping his gaze across the surrounding people. Yang Junhao sneered, and no longer said superfluous words, simply pouring power into the long sword and beginning to activate his spirit tool. Wong, 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 on the blade, the vein-like lines lit up one after another as ceaseless raging flames surged out, instantly raising the surrounding temperature by a whole lot. However, the raging flames surged in front of him, forming a casing, protecting him within, as if a shield. A spirit tool that was both offensive and defensive. Fiery sea and raging tides, sword of violent winds that breaks through void. Yang Junhao shouted loudly, leaping out and bring a sea of flames with mighty momentum. Wen Yi Jian shifted his feet, evading swiftly. Shua, 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 Yang Junhao attacked repeatedly, while Wen Yi Jian kept dodging. It was as if Yang Junhao had taken the upper hand. As expected of the first on the prodigy roll, this strength is too powerful. Defeat this arrogant disciple of the East region, and let him know that we North region aren't to be provoked. Everyone complimented one after another, while the girls that were crazy about Wen Yi Jian were extremely nervous, gripping their hands tightly in front of their chests and praying for Wen Yi Jian. 3 moves have passed, Wen Yi Jian said indifferently and shook his right hand as a sword appeared, very simply thrusting at Yang Junhao. This sword thrust broke through Yang Junhao's concentrated attacks, splitting the sea of fire, and pierced the fire shield. This shield trembled once and shattered as the blade continued to thrust almost without a pause, and with a pu, Yang Junhao's right shoulder was penetrated. Wen Yi-jian withdrew his sword and said indifferently, "Merely so, truly disappoints me." Wen Yi-jian, Wen Yi-jian, Wen Yi-jian. The girls who were extremely nervous earlier began to scream, appearing indescribably excited. The men's morale was low, and even more so full of disbelief. One strong as Yang Junhao was defeated in one move, then even if Hu Niu or Ling Han took the field, what could even be changed? At the last fight when Hu Niu fought Yang Junhao, it was also a close fight. Although Hu Niu didn't use her terrifying teeth, it still proved Yang Junhao's exceptional strength. Wen Yi-jian was too strong to the point of making people hopeless. Zhu Xian, after exploring the mystery realm, how about returning to East Region with me? Wen Yi-jian asked Zhu Xian. Hiss, this guy actually dared to dig Master Ling's people. Everyone was shocked, seeing Wen Yi-jian yield at first, they thought he feared Ling Han, but now he openly invited Zhu Xian. He completely didn't care about Ling Han at all. Obviously, this guy certainly didn't want to come into a direct conflict with a heaven-grade alchemist, but he wasn't the least bit afraid of one. He certainly couldn't resist a heaven-grade alchemist head-on, but didn't need to be deliberately patient and accommodate him. Clearly, he didn't need Ling Han to refine pills. Austerity followed desirelessness. This guy was truly hard to see through and was quite cunning. He admitted earlier that he didn't dare to exchange blows with Ling Han, and now if Ling Han flipped out at him, wouldn't that tarnish Ling Han's image as a heaven-grade alchemist? If word got out, everyone would say that a dignified heaven-grade alchemist had no tolerance for others and bullied a spiritual pedestal tier relying on his position. Ling Han's gaze turned cold. He disliked being toyed with in the palm of others. Niu will beat the heck out of him. Hu Niu jumped out and blocked Ling Han, walking towards Wen Yi-jian with her hands behind her back, and said, "Ugly monster, Niu will fight you. If you lose, take this woman away." She turned around and pointed at Zhu Xian. Everyone was dumbfounded. Why did losing mean taking away Zhu Xian? If so, then they also wanted to lose, wishing they had taken the field earlier. Wen Yi-jian laughed loudly and took out a stick of sugar-coated haw, handing it to Hu Niu, and said, "Little girl, take it and eat it on the side." Hu Niu began to drool, and snorted. "You think food can tempt Niu? Then why are you drooling?" Wen Yi-jian laughed and said, "This little girl is quite interesting. Whose kid is it?" Everyone looked at him sympathetically. This little girl's bite was the battle prowess of 20 stars flower blossom tier. Why don't you try? Xiao, Hu Niu leapt out, firing a punch at Wen Yi-jian. What? Ling Han was slightly shocked. Hu Niu broke through and was at the spiritual pedestal tier. Chapter 461, Punishment. Chapter 461, Punishment. Reverie _ With Ling Han's former life's heaven tier perception, there were very few people he couldn't see through. Hu Niu was one of them. Unknowingly, this little girl was already in the spiritual pedestal tier. So fast. Wen Yi-jian only saw a blur before his eyes and Hu Niu's small fist was already in front of him, giving him no chance to parry or dodge. However, he was a genius after all, and with a glare, 2 beams of light fired from his eyes, streaking towards Hu Niu's small hand. Peng. UP dated. By Novelful. Commander. With a sound, the 2 sword beams hit Hu Niu's fist. The power behind them wasn't small, deflecting Hu Niu's fist and scraping past her cheek. Wen Yi-jian's combat awareness was extremely strong. He immediately started counterattacking once the danger was resolved. With a finger as sword, he thrusted at Hu Niu. Xiao, Hu Niu's figure flashed, disappearing once again. Wen Yi-jian cried out not good in his thoughts. As expected, a wind blew against the back of his head as Hu Niu's fired another punch. He hurriedly leaned forward, but all the black hair on his head was raised, as if turning into swords that stung at Hu Niu. Peng, as the punch hit, several hundred strands of Wen Yi-jian's hair instantly snapped, but traces of blood emerged on Hu Niu's small hand from being stabbed by the hair swords. Hu Na's infuriated, firing her small fists repeatedly. Wen Yi-jian controlled the hair swords to resist as he turned and was finally face to face with Hu Niu. Pointing with a finger, Instantly 9 flashes of sword chi winnowed and martial intent spread, emitting a terrifying coercive presence. At this moment, he was like an emperor of the path of the sword, no one daring to look directly at him. Hunyo, however, was unafraid, turning her fist into claws and waving at those attacks of sword chi. Pu, 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 the sword chi was all destroyed, but Hunyo's attacks were also to no avail. The few exchanges between the two were extremely fast, just like flashes of electricity, each move and style extremely critical. If either of them made a slight mistake, they would receive a heavy injury. A hush fell over the crowd, even everyone's breathing was involuntarily held back. Only after a good while could the sounds of long rough and long breathing be heard. Everyone was shocked inside. So it turned out these two people were strong to such a degree. No matter who else took the field, faced with Hunyo's attacks, they'd definitely be hit, and in Hunyo's position, faced with Wen Yijian's counterattacks, they'd definitely suffer ruthless aftershock. However, the two tied, truly frightening. Wen Yijian's was staring wide-eyed. This little girl was so young and she could already rival him. If they were the same age, then wouldn't Hunyo only need one hand to suppress him? Hunyo's viciousness erupted as she kept attacking continuously. Her petite figure leapt like lightning, making Wen Yijian weary with parrying. However, he was certainly strong even under such circumstances. He still had power to return attacks, creating quite a bit of pressure for Hunyo. Ling Han was shocked as it was his first time seeing Hunyo fight so strenuously. It was not that Hunyo didn't think of using her terrifying teeth to decide the victory with one attack, but that she had no chance unleash an attack so closely. Wen Yijian's battle prowess was also not to be underestimated. If Hunyo were to bite on Wen Yijian, she would definitely be struck by Wen Yijian's sword chi. The result of that would truly be hard to tell. Hunyo stopped. She had the absolute initiative, and the sugar-coated whore that was originally in Wen Yijian's hand was snatched by her. At this moment, she peeled the sugar coating and began eating it deliciously. Ugly monster, you can take this ugly woman away. Wen Yijian laughed instead and said, I really underestimated the people of the North region. Little girl, you can rival me, and after 20 years, I'll wait for you to come challenge me. With that said, he turned to leave. Hunyo cried out in anger, how could there be a person that was so untrustworthy? She clearly said that if he couldn't beat her, then he should take the ugly girl away. And yet he left just like that, too detestable. Hunyo's more impressive. She actually tied Wen Yijian in a fight. Hehe, truly interesting. The first of the prodigy role, Yang Junhao, was actually defeated in one move, but the third-ranked Hunyo could suppress Wen Yijian. Wonder if Yang Junhao's gone red yet? Everyone discussed spiritedly. Hunyo didn't disappoint them as expected. The stronger the opponent, the stronger she was, at last saving the face of North Region's martial arts. Although there were many people who could suppress Wen Yijian at the scene, but if a flower blossom tier warrior intervened, wouldn't that truly be saying that there was no one else in the North region? If this flower blossom tier martial artist was of the young generation, then it wouldn't be a problem, proving the strength of North region's martial arts. But, if only one from the older generation could suppress him, then it would truly be humiliating. Ling Han looked at Zhu Xian and said, Follow me. The two entered the already set-up tent, which blocked the crowd's gaze, making the crowd feel itch on the inside. A man and a woman alone, would they do something embarrassing? The tent was large, not only having chairs and tables, but also beds. No one lacked a spatial ring and could bring all they wanted. Ling Han sat down and said, When did I become your master? Zhu Xian slowly fell to her knees and said, Xian wants to do some things for Master Han. Ling Han laughed and said, Being a maidservant at a tavern and following by my side, that's doing things for me. Please instruct me, Master Han. Xian will definitely try hard, Zhu Xian said seriously. Ling Han rolled his eyes. Since when did this girl become endearingly silly? He shook his head and said, This doesn't feel good. He pointed at the table and said, Go lie over there. Zhu Xian's pretty face turned red and then white. Did this guy's lust erupt, wanting to take her over here? She hurriedly said, Master Ling, don't misunderstand, Xian truly wants to work for you. I didn't misunderstand, you misunderstood. Ling Han took out a rattan. I dislike those who don't listen the most, so I'm going to beat you. Zhu Xian'er walked over obediently to the side of the table, prostrating, and sticking up her butt. She couldn't help but blush in this position, so embarrassing. Ling Han laughed mischievously. After this whipping, this girl wouldn't bother him anymore, right? Pa, he unhesitatingly lashed out, emitting a crisp sound, but this was only a normal rattan, so how could it possibly hurt Zhu Xian'er, who was a spiritual pedestal tier? Pa, sounds were ceaseless. Zhu Xian'er's pretty face was getting more red and hot. She seemed to have understood something and couldn't help but blush. She could imagine how she looked right now. Her pert buttocks should be facing Ling Han, right? Too embarrassing. Too shameful. Her consciousness was somewhat blurry, and she felt that her face was shockingly hot, as if it were about to burn. A feeling never felt before breeding within, sprawling and rising. Just when she was in a daze, she heard Hu Niu say, "Ling Han, you're hitting too lightly, let Niu help you." Before she came back to her senses, her butt felt an unbearable pain, making her cry out involuntarily. She turned around abruptly and saw that Hu Niu was biting down on her butt. Chapter 462, Entering the Mystery Realm. Chapter 462, Entering the Mystery Realm. Reverie _ What's going on? What's going on? Outside, the crowd was extremely impatient, jumping up and down and almost going crazy. They heard pa sounds earlier, and now this rapturous scream. What exactly was going on inside? It was impossible not to think wrongly. If it weren't for the fear of a heaven-grade alchemist's power and influence, someone would definitely have charged into the tent to see what was happening. After a while, the tent was opened, and Zhu Xian'er walked out, but without taking 2 steps, she reached towards her petite but as if it was hurt. And watching her gait, it was clearly somewhat limp. It was over. Their goddess had been defiled. Beast. Ling Han felt it strange. The 12 Skies mystery realm was a mystery realm that belonged to the North region, so why did a genius from the East region come? As the time approached day by the day, more and more people came to the mountain valley. For example, the Winter Moon sect, the Beast Emperor sect, and the like came in groups one by one, 10 people at a time. A great sect like the Winter Moon sect possessed several dozen entry quotas, and sects that were slightly lesser like the Great Sorrow sect and the Cold Water sect had a few to a dozen quotas. However, only these sects were qualified to receive entries, or either Leviathans like the Alchemist Society and Spirit Treasures Pavilion. However, the Alchemist Society didn't care at all, and the Spirit Treasures Pavilion gifted it to those on the prodigy roll. When the Winter Moon sect arrived, Ling Han saw Feng Yang. After 1 year, Feng Yang also advanced to the spiritual pedestal tier, even reaching the 2nd layer. His advancement speed was somewhat shocking. It seemed his bloodline had already completely developed. Wild strength berserk apes were shattering void tier beings in the ancient times, and when the bloodline was awakened, it had great benefits on improving martial arts. Additionally, he also had a spiritual infant tier teacher who could bring him endless resources. Before the flower blossom tier, it was acceptable no matter how fast one's progression was, but if it was still so after the flower blossom tier, then it would truly be frightening. Feng Yang also saw Ling Han and revealed a complicated look, but it immediately turned resolute, with blistering killing intent. He obviously knew Ling Han had become a heaven-grade alchemist, and normally speaking, he would never have a chance for revenge in this lifetime. However, Ling Han rose too abruptly and hadn't gathered the power that heaven-grade alchemists should have, so he still had a chance. Secretly killing Ling Han, especially in a mystery realm, who would know? This guy actually didn't attend the prodigy battle. Ling Han nodded inwardly and guessed that Feng Yang was at a key stage in cultivation, probably breaking through to the spiritual pedestal tier, the reason why he didn't make it in time. Everyone came to pay respects to Ling Han, who was a dignified heaven-grade alchemist and could be said to be the figure with the highest status in the North region at the moment. Even if the masters of the 3 greatest sects of the valley came, they would have to be respectful in front of Ling Han. However, this was North region, and the strongest were warriors of the spiritual infant tier. Even stronger elites couldn't come over without difficulty. Thus, for spiritual infant tier warriors, whether Ling Han was a heaven-grade alchemist or an earth-grade one really had no difference. This was called, when the cat was away, The mice would play and North region was so. Spiritual infant tier warriors were the strongest in martial arts, just like shattering void tiers in the middle state, so they naturally didn't need to fear a heaven-grade alchemist. Of course, if several heaven-tier martial artists, or deity transformation tier elites, followed by Ling Han's side, the situation would obviously be different. Although the mist in the valley had already dispersed, no one dared to enter. It was rumored that before the mystery realm officially opened, the valley when the mist dispersed was greatly inauspicious. Those who entered would most likely be killed, so everyone would rather stay outside a while longer. After an entire month's time, everyone entered the valley one after another. The major forces in the North region jointly controlled this mystery realm, and no one could enter without an entry quota issued by them. On the way, Ling Han took Guang Yuan and Li Sai-chan on another path. When the time came, he would store the two inside the Black Tower and enter the mystery realm using the secret key. However, he didn't want to be target for all. The inheritance of the 12 palaces was too overwhelming. Even Flower Blossom and spiritual infant tier cultivators would extend their hands while disregarding his heaven-grade tier alchemist identity. Moreover, contending over opportunities inside a historic site, no one had to give anyone face, and at the worst they could just kill him. And if they could do away with witnesses, so what if they did? This time there were certainly Flower Blossom tier warriors that entered, like Ao Feng of the Winter Moon sect. Flower Blossom tier elites that weren't 50 years of age could definitely be considered young, conforming with the entry conditions of the 12 heaven mystery realms. Moreover, the Beast Emperor sect, the Blood Flame Valley, and so on also had such geniuses who were highly ranked on the prodigy roll 20 years ago. Therefore, Flower Blossom tier warriors, or else it was quite normal to break through in the 80s. With Flower Blossom tier competitors around, Ling Han decided to be more low-key. Liu Yutong, Kan Yi, and the others took one path and dragged Zhu Xian'er along, heading to the bottom of the valley where the mystery realm's entrance was, whereas Ling Han came to a thick forest inside the valley with Guang Yuan and Li Sai-chan, and seeing there was no one in the surroundings, he stored the two inside the Black Tower and took out the key of the Sagittarius Palace. Wang, the key immediately lit up as if it established a connection to a type of power in the mountain valley. Wang, a flash of brilliance wrapped around him, as his figure immediately disappeared. When he reappeared again, he was in an unfamiliar place. It was a barren land with round rocks everywhere, a field of grey. Is this a small world? Ling Han looked afar. In the ancient times, there were mighty cultivators who could separate a city, and even a greater place from the world, overlapping with the current world and forming a mystery lander, very miraculous feat. Such heaven-defying handiwork, Ling Han definitely couldn't do it in his previous lifetime. Just as he was about to let Guang Yuan and Li Sai-chan out, he was startled, because not far from him, someone was teleported inside. People were randomly teleported after entering the mystery realm, appearing in different places. That was a very fine beauty, her skin white and sparkling as if it was a high-grade jade. She was tall with long legs and her bosom ample, extremely captivating. She was obviously somewhat at a loss, but very soon composed herself, and at the same time, she discovered Ling Han, revealing a vigilant expression. Fighting over treasures in mystery realms, everyone was a hidden enemy, so what if it was a heaven-grade alchemist? In here, the most important thing was to protect oneself. The spiritual chi here was really abundant. Updated by Box Novel. Ling Han retracted his gaze. After he advanced into the spiritual pedestal tier, each spiritual pedestal layer constructed consumed endless origin power, so even for him, his cultivation progression speed now dropped to 3 months for increasing one layer. This actually wasn't slow. After 2 years, he would be past the spiritual pedestal tier. His base was so solid, and being invincible in the same tier, there naturally was a price to pay. However, cultivating in here, he only needed 2 months to increase by 1 layer. Unfortunately, 12 heaven mystery realms only opened for a few months at a time. He was now at the middle stage of first layer the spiritual pedestal tier. Without some special occurrences, he would only be second layer spiritual pedestal tier when he leaves. Chem. Ling Han suddenly felt a shred of crisis and immediately held a sword in hand, standing still. The girl in the distance thought Ling Han harbored killing intent towards her, immediately turning to run. Peng. A strange scene appeared. A rock stood up, smashing its fist forward, and the girl instantly was mushed into blood and pulp. Chapter 463 Rock Spirit. Chapter 463 Rock Spirit. Reverie _ This was a golem. It shrunk its body earlier, as if an inanimate stone, but now it suddenly rioted, smashing a delicate flower-like beauty into pulp. The scene was somewhat tragic. The golem wasn't huge, only a meter or so tall. Its head and limbs wormed out of its jagged body, which were also made of accumulated by pieces of rocks. Rock spirit, Ling Han said lightly. Heaven and earth had spiritual power that could birth all kinds of living creatures, and several of which weren't completely made of flesh and blood. For example, Ents, a race that was formed after plants possessed wisdom. For example, strange fire, another type of living creature that, at its pinnacle, could turn into the shape of a human, such that even normal martial artists wouldn't be able to tell it was different from a true human. The one he faced now was a rock spirit. The living spirits of the 5 elements had some things in common. They felt no pain like normal living creatures and were very, very hard to kill. Strange fire didn't have a physical body and couldn't be hurt by gravity. Only water-type arts could restrain it. The special trait of a rock spirit was its scary defensive power, like Ling Han's rock cliff body. Although it was incomparable to rare metals of the same tier, it was still extremely tough. After mushing the girl, the rock spirit turned to face Ling Han. Despite having no facial features, it still gave Ling Han a feeling of being stared at. This place may be a holy land for cultivation, but it's also a dangerous place, Ling Han muttered. However, if I can subdue a few rock spirits, then I could spread beans into soldiers, surely enough to give people a great surprise. The 1,000 corpse sect thirsted for the spatial spirit tool in his hand that could accommodate living things for the purpose of hiding a large army inside. When they launched an surprise attack, the effect of it would definitely be shocking. In the time he was lost in thought, the golem charged over and fired a punch, momentous and heavy, breaking through the speed of sound. A visible void instantly formed behind the fist, with chaotic burst of the sonic boom. Ling Han laughed, also greeting with a punch, and said, "Think I'm scared of you, let's see whose fist is harder." Peng! The 2 fists clashed as a shock wave instantly burst forth. The golem was sent flying, its right arm shattered. Ling Han was astounded. He didn't hold back in this punch, simply not using arts or fist chi, but it only shattered one of the golem's arm yet not made the golem explode completely. It could be seen how powerful the golem was and how tough its physique was. Against the golem, there was no need to hold back. Because the golem's shattered arm turned into infinitely small rocks that fell on the ground, but immediately began rolling as if it had its own life. When the rocks gathered underneath the golem's feet, the rocks fluttered and connected to the severed arm. In an instant, the golem's arm returned to how it was. Strange fire didn't have a physical body and wasn't hurt by brute force. On the other hand, the golem had a tough physique on top of its terrifying recovery power. Ang! The golem's head opened, as if cracking open a large mouth, unleashing a furious roar. It had never suffered such a great loss, having its arm shattered by someone else. Teng, 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 it charged at Ling Han in large strides, and with each step, the ground trembled slightly, showing its terrifying mass. It fired another punch. "Can't beat you into submission?" Ling Han smiled and also fired a punch. Peng! The golem's right arm was shattered again, and this time, Ling Han didn't wait for it to recover, charging up and firing a flurry of punches. The golem's body was very hard, not much different from rare metals of the same tier, but it still couldn't be mentioned in the same breath after all. Otherwise, it'd be Iron Man and not golem. The rock spirit was somewhat lacking in defense when compared with the gold spirit, but its recovery power was strong. After receiving a dozen punches, the golem was completely shattered into bits and pieces, spreading all over the ground. However, these small pieces of rock immediately began rolling and recombining. Ling Han didn't stop it, but when it was about to finish reconstructing, he fired a punch and shattered it into bits and pieces again. The golem began to reconstruct, but every time it was about to finish, Ling Han would break it up. After 5 consecutive times, it finally stopped reconstructing, and the several hundred pieces of shattered rocks began to wriggle one after another, turning into several hundred small golem. Ang! These golems synchronized and roared in anger. Instantly, the pieces of rocks that lay on the desolate field all stood up. They were all golems. T. Ling Han was somewhat surprised that he actually landed in the den of golems. Was this luck extremely terrible or extremely good? Ang! All the golems roared towards the sky, echoing one another. Ha ha! Ling Han laughed loudly. With this many golems, he could organize a powerful army. He waved his hand and said, "Quickly come into the bowl." Peng, 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 there were at least 100 large golems charging towards Ling Han, and the shattered golem took advantage to reconstruct. The life force and recovery power of these type of spirits were truly a bit overbearing. Ling Han greeted them by firing punches wildly at these golems. His battle prowess was too terrifying, sending a golem flying with each punch, but these golems were unharmed, immediately charging right back. Hard to take care of. Just the right time to polish his fist techniques. Ling Han launched the war elephant fist, and 7 flashes of momentous chi surged, evolving into 8 ancient war elephants that rammed into those golems. He pulled no punches as his battle prowess immediately rocketed and the war elephants dominated, crushing into pieces any golem that was touched. However, this only suppressed the golems and couldn't destroy the golems' strong recovery power. They still reconstructed, entering the fray again. Ling Han considered storing them into the Black Tower, but every golem had its own consciousness. It would be the same after shattering their consciousness to be unable to store them in the Black Tower no matter what. It seemed like they needed a taste of power before they learned a lesson. Ling Han unleashed the demon birth sword. With the destructive power of a 10th tier spirit tool, would these golems still be able to recover after a strike of the sword? Once demon birth sword was unleashed, the 10th tier spirit tool's vicious presence overflowed the area instantly. The golems lost some of their viciousness, beginning to hesitate. They were extremely vicious and merciless a moment ago, having no scruples at all, but now. Haha, you guys also know fear? Ling Han said, laughing. However, these golems were naturally vicious after all. They immediately regained their vicious attitude, rushing towards Ling Han. Ling Han swung demon birth sword, and instantly 9 flashes of sword chi surged, sweeping towards those golems. The golems weren't highly intelligent, but they had instincts. Each one of them avoided the demon birth sword's blade. However, they couldn't completely avoid the sword chi. Pu, pu, pu. Many golems were instantly struck by the sword chi and sliced into 2. This time, the golems reconstructed much slower. The sword chi was slashed out by a 10th tier spirit tool, possessing terrifying destructive power. Even with the golem's recovery speed, they couldn't reconstruct immediately. Ling Han suppressed all the golems once again with his own might, showing his invincibility in the spiritual pedestal tier. Ang! These golems retreated one after another and gathered together, piling up into a human pyramid. Seeing these golems continuously drilling into each other's bodies, Ling Han couldn't help but be astounded, blurting out, "Could it be that these golems were all broken up from a huge golem?" Chapter 464, The 10th Flash of Sword Chi. Chapter 464, The 10th Flash of Sword Chi. Reverie _ All the golems weren't very tall, about 1 meter or so, round and even a bit charmingly naive. However, they piled together and reached 10 meters height now. The massive physique no longer had any charm but was instead filled with coercive power. In an instant, the massive golem finished its reconstruction, firing a punch at Ling Han. Pa, 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 pa. The speed of the fist was too fast, tearing open the air and forming ripples as the sonic boom sounded repeatedly. An intense fighting spirit arose within Ling Han as he laughed loudly and said, "Come, come, come, let us fight 3,000 round." He greeted with a punch. Peng! 2 fists greatly different in size collided and emitted an earth-shakingly loud sound, instantly forming a shock wave that pushed forward in all directions. A mushroom cloud rose up from where the two were standing, rising up to several thousand meters high, and dust filled the air. It went to show the power of this clash. Half of Ling Han sunk into the mud, and on the massive golem's fist were several cracks, which were being repaired at an extremely fast speed. In this punch, the massive golem's power took the upper hand, whereas Ling Han was superior as far as hardness of fists was concerned. Ling Han nodded inwardly. The massive golem didn't break past the threshold of the flower blossom tier, but the several hundred golems all had the power of the 9th layer of the spiritual pedestal tier. How terrifying was it with all their power stacked together? If it weren't for the massive gap between the flower blossom tier and the spiritual pedestal tier, as a spiritual ocean tier, the golem's power would have long broken through the threshold of the spiritual pedestal tier. Ling Han raised his leg and walked out from the mud. At this time, the massive golem fired another punch, but this time, the fist was wrapped in a grey brilliance, appearing somewhat worrisome. Martial intent, Ling Han muttered. But could the spirit of the 5 elements cultivate like normal living beings? It was obviously impossible. This should be an inborn ability, just like strange fire possessing terrifying temperature, burning all things. Ling Han circulated origin power and fired War Elephant Fist, battling the massive golem head-on. Hong! 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 The two weren't in the flower blossom tier, but their battle prowess broke through the theoretical limit of the spiritual pedestal tier and could be called half-step flower blossom tier. Thus, their battle was also extremely fierce, and as the fists collided, their combined destructive power was shocking. Fortunately, this was wilderness, allowing them to battle to their heart's content. And Ling Han did. No spiritual pedestal tier warrior could possibly let him be so unbridled, and when encountering a flower blossom tier opponent, he would have to constantly think about how to stay alive and wouldn't be able to put all his spirit into the battle. Now it was different since this was truly an evenly matched battle. The massive golem's power was even slightly stronger than his, boasting even more surprising recovery power, allowing Ling Han to attack as much as he liked without having worry about killing his sparring partner because of using too much force. Hong, as he threw a punch, 7 flashes of fist chi were fired out. Haha, as expected, battles are the most direct and the fastest way to increase martial arts comprehension. Ling Han laughed loudly. But on second thought, it would be too wasteful to use such a rare opponent to polish fist techniques. Watch the sword. He unleashed the demon birth sword again and struck towards the massive golem. His grasp of the way of the sword was obviously higher than the fists, and compounded with the 10th tier spirit tool, the power was naturally even fiercer. Originally, the two were evenly matched, with Ling Han being behind ever so slightly, but now he immediately turned the tables, gaining quite an advantage. It was at least a 7-3 situation, and Ling Han held the 7. Ang! The massive golem let out a roar. If it were struck by sword chi, its recovery speed would slow down by 1-fold, and if it were sliced by the demon birth sword directly, then the recovery would slow down by 10-fold. The rock spirit probably didn't fear bodily pains, but no matter if it was demon birth sword or sword chi, both contained martial intent, which could be used to make assaults on the divine sense terrifying, making the massive golem immensely pained. If it had no divine sense, how could it be a living spirit? And if it had no divine sense, Ling Han would have long stored this guy in the Black Tower. However, the massive golem was truly tough and battled Ling Han non-stop even though it was clearly at a disadvantage, exposing its viciousness. Ang! It suddenly opened its mouth to roar, and a sound wave swatted at Ling Han like a tsunami. This was a large-scale attack, so Ling Han couldn't dodge and could only take it head-on. Pu! Ling Han groaned as blood oozed out from his nose and ears. The impact dug right into his body, affecting his relatively soft organs and brain, almost making him collapse right away. Oh man, if this were any other spiritual pedestal tier warrior, even one at the 9th layer of the spiritual pedestal tier, they would have been heavily injured from that roar, possibly even imploding and dying. You also have an ultimate move, huh? Ling Han laughed loudly, his fighting spirit soaring. If the golem was easily taken care of, then there wouldn't be much point in fighting. He charged up, swinging demon birth sword and raising up endless winds and clouds. The two continued to lash out at each other. Ling Han's released his fighting spirit to his heart's content, and although there were quite a few injuries on his body, he felt extremely at ease, as if something was about to rush out from his body. He knew that it was the 10th flash of sword chi. From 9 to 10 was a fundamental change. The 10th flash of sword chi could condense into sword ray, so it was also exceptionally hard to cultivate. However, Ling Han forgot about the 10th flash of sword chi, and about Sword Ray as well, only wishing to battle to his heart's content. This secretly coincided with the way of the heavens. Intentional pursuit simply equaled more haste and less speed. His action through inaction, following his heart, was the best path. He struck with his sword, and after 9 flashes of sword chi were fired out, a new flash of sword chi emerged. Although it was only a foot long, and disappeared on its own once it was fired, it was still a real 10th flash of sword chi. Ha. Ling Han felt even more satisfied, swinging demon birth sword. The 10th flash of sword chi soon stabilized and joined the other 9 flashes, bursting forth the power it should have. This was a fundamental change. From this point on, Ling Han could finally be called a true king amongst martial artists. Ling Han's battle prowess rose steeply and instantly suppressed the massive golems completely, striking the powerful rock spirit into continuous retreat without a chance of retaliation. Ang! The massive golem used his old trick and roared violently again, wanting to shock Ling Han with the sound waves. Break! Ling Han's eyes lit up. The demon birth sword struck as 10 flashes of sword chi flew out. Pu, 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 pu. The sound waves stormed over, but he sliced them into bits. The remaining waves were split into 2 and swept by his side, no longer being able to hurt him. Ha. The 10th flash of sword chi is powerful as expected. Ling Han laughed loudly, bold and unconstrained. The massive golem stopped its attacks, staring at Ling Han from afar. Not going to fight anymore? Gonna admit defeat? Ling Han said smilingly. He was suddenly startled, for he saw the massive golem's body undulate like it wasn't a golem, but something made of water. It was extremely fierce, and what came after was its presence, which was advancing in an extremely powerful direction. This golem is about to advance. Chapter 465 Rock Spirit Advances. Chapter 465 Rock Spirit Advances. Reverie _ Hey, no way. Is it really good to play this way? Ling Han sighed. He'd finally had the complete advantage and cultivated out the 10th flash of sword Chul was perfect. But suddenly his opponent cheated, and no longer fought him on the same tier, rising to the flower blossom tier. How could he handle this? Ling Han was very freakish, currently only at the first layer of the spiritual pedestal tier, but his battle prowess was already halfway into the flower blossom tier. Even if he advanced into the 9th layer of the spiritual pedestal tier, his battle prowess would merely become just a stronger halfway into the flower blossom tier. How could the boundary of mortals be so easily surpassed? Even Rain Emperor relied on the power of the nation to forcefully push halfway into the flower blossom tier level strength to the full flower blossom tier. The power of the nation. Just how many people and martial artists did Rain Country have? Earlier, when the massive golem split into infinite small golems, it lay on the ground like an inanimate stone, probably absorbing the power of the earth and making its final efforts in breaking through to the flower blossom tier. Therefore, when he and the girl came, the golem was immediately alarmed because it was in the middle of a crucial period. The girl didn't notice and stepped on the rock, naturally making the golem feel danger and offhandedly smacking her to death. If someone were to poke the nose of a martial artist cultivating in seclusion, wouldn't the martial artist be infuriated to the point of wanting to kill someone? Currently, the massive golem couldn't beat Ling Han, and could only forcefully begin its breakthrough. Once it advanced into the flower blossom tier, killing Ling Han would be as easy as the turn of a palm. This wasn't just about revenge, but also its survival. It had to take the chance. Ling Han wanted to stop the golem from taking this step, but after a bit of thought, he gave up on this thought. He intended to subdue this massive golem, so the stronger it was, the better. The golem could cheat, but so could he. Small Tower, can you intervene? Ling Han asked. This was a mystery realm and was its own small world. Small Tower immediately said, although this is a small world and I've absorbed some source power, it's still not enough to conceal the power fluctuations when intervening. Ling Han was instantly disappointed. After all that, Small Tower still couldn't be used. It seemed like he could only stop the massive golem from breaking through or turn around to run. However, if the Black Tower was unleashed and if its power isn't used, I can still suppress such presence fluctuations, Small Tower continued. Oh! Ling Han was moved. If the Black Tower was unleashed and the massive golem was lured in, then inside the Black Tower, wouldn't this golem have to listen obediently even if it was a shattering void tier creature, let alone a flower blossom tier one? He immediately made up his mind, allowing the massive golem to break through, thereby subduing a flower blossom tier rock spirit. Spirits of the 5 elements, each one possessed unusual abilities. The strange fire could support him in pill refinement, the rock spirit could nourish the land, the gold spirit could make weapons sharper and tougher, the wood spirit was the source of life and had surprising effects of healing, the water spirit could summon clouds and winds, relieving droughts. Ling Han waited silently for the massive golem's breakthrough. Since there was nothing to do, he summoned Guang Yuan and Li Sai Chan out of the Black Tower and the 3 began cultivating together. The spiritual qi was too dense in here, forming spirit qi like mist. Cultivating 1 day could equal cultivating 10 days on the outside. Ling Han and Guang Yuan were martial arts maniacs and immediately went in the zone. Though Li Sai Chan focused on pill refining, it was necessary to cultivate. She didn't have a strange fire, and the level of alchemy was restricted by martial arts. Therefore, she very soon began to cultivate as well. They all took a medicinal pill supportive to cultivation, furthering the cultivation speed. Only when they used up their soul power did they stop, and at this time, the massive golem was still breaking through. Rocks broke into pieces all over its body as its body was actually shrinking. Ling Han could clearly see that it wasn't that the massive golem failed, but conversely, the golem was walking down the path firmly. Flower blossom tier creatures transcended the mortal body, and for the rock spirit, it was the same. It condensed the essence within its body and cast off useless rocks, developing towards a higher level of life. "What's that large guy?" Li Sai Chan finally had the time to ask. Rock spirit, a rare rock of the world that attained wisdom and turned into a living being, Ling Han said simplistically. "It seems to be undergoing some sort of change," Guang Yuan said. "Yes." Ling Han nodded. "It's charging into the flower blossom tier. I'm waiting for it to successfully break through, and then to subdue it." Pu. Guang Yuan and Li Sai Chan spurted out at the same time, feeling that Ling Han had gone crazy. The flower blossom tier. Weren't those 3 words enough? Below the flower blossom tier, all were powerless ants, and no matter how freakish Ling Han was, he couldn't possibly compare with a flower blossom tier being, unless he rose to the throne, allocating the power of the nation like the Rain Emperor did. Would the rock spirit show mercy because he was a heaven-grade alchemist? Obviously not. Young Master Han? Guang Yuan and Li Sai Chan looked nervous all across their faces. No matter. Ling Han smiled slightly. He possessed the Black Tower, which was his greatest trump card. Guang Yuan and Li Sai Chan obviously thought of it, although they didn't know what exactly the Black Tower was, they simply knew that Ling Han could hide in that place of absolute safety in a desperate situation. After they finished cultivating, Guang Yuan and Li Sai Chan returned to the Black Tower. The massive golem could finish its breakthrough at any time, so they didn't want to be flustered when that time came. As expected, after another 2 hours passed, the massive golem suddenly let out an explosive roar. The sound waves soared into the sky, ripping into the clouds with terrifyingly shocking momentum. Its height shrunk to a little over 30 centimeters, but it was still much taller than normal people. However, compared to its previous height of 10 feet, it could be called a shrunken version. The flower blossom tier. This rock spirit already cast off its mortal body and advanced into the tier that all living beings dreamed of. It was different, completely different. This massive golem's presence was like the ocean and a pattern appeared on its torso. It seemed like a character, and also a bit like a pattern, impossible to differentiate. It was old and rustic, as if an ancient language that existed in the primitive times. The massive golem looked at Ling Han in a lofty manner. Although it didn't evolve eyes, its feet slowly left the ground, floating in midair. The flower blossom tier beings could fly. A chubby golem floating in midair. This scene was a bit funny. Ling Han laughed loudly and said, "Blockhead, come hit me." At the same time, he sent a thought to Small Tower. "You can begin." Small Tower didn't respond and just directly unleashed the Black Tower. Wang. A pitch-black tower appeared, only a few meters big at first, but it immediately enlarged, reaching several hundred meters in size. A door opened at the bottom and revealed an indistinct entrance. Looking from outside was a blur of chaos, nothing could be clearly seen. The Black Tower was extremely plain, neither having the gold words of indestructible golden scroll floating, nor raising an ancient and primitive presence. It was ordinary as ordinary could be. Ling Han knew that small tower controlled the circulation of Black Tower's presence, or else, if it leaked out, it would attract the attention of powerful beings from the higher realm, directly breaking into this realm to seize the Black Tower. Blockhead, come into the bowl, come into the tower. Chapter 466, Subduing the Rock Spirit. Chapter 466, Subduing the Rock Spirit. Reverie _ The massive golem went berserker. Puny being of the human race actually dared to provoke it time and time again, especially when it had advanced to the flower blossom tier, which was an increase on the level of life, surpassing Ling Han by countless times. If its intelligence was normal, then it would definitely have scruples about the Black Tower that suddenly appeared. However, the rock spirit acted based on instincts. It instinctively felt that the Black Tower was quite ordinary, so what did it have to fear? Shio, it immediately soared through the sky as a terrifying presence swirled by. Even the ground was trembling. Ling Han's face turned pale and his skin rippled. This wasn't as simple as mental oppression. The flower blossom tier presence could be physicalized, especially the special type like the rock spirit, birthed by heaven and earth. The repressive power of it was too strong. Ling Han slowly retreated, arriving at the Black Tower's entrance. Ang! The massive golem soared over. With one punch, it was going to crush the human who dared to shatter its head and hands repeatedly. Ling Han retreated once more, and Shio, his entire person, entered the Black Tower. The massive golem didn't hesitate and charged right in. Seeing that Ling Han wasn't far from it, its viciousness instantly erupted. It launched itself over, throwing a punch onto the top of Ling Han's head. It wanted to smash Ling Han into pulp. Freeze! Ling Han said lightly, and the massive golem's movements suddenly stopped. In the Black Tower, he was the dictator. At this time, Small Tower already turned Black Tower into a microscopic seed. Even unleashing the Black Tower and controlling the leaking of the presence was a burden for Small Tower. It would consume source power, which it naturally didn't want to waste. The massive golem was a bit baffled. Why could it suddenly not move? Its intelligence apparently wasn't enough to figure it out as it shook its head abruptly, as if racking its brains. Ling Han laughed loudly and swiped his finger, and the massive golem immediately turned upside down. Ang! The massive golem opened its mouth to roar and a sound wave instantly stormed over. Freeze again, Ling Han said lightly, and the sound wave stopped abruptly, freezing in midair as if time could be stopped. He walked over and casually kneaded the curved sound wave into a ball, and then pressed towards the massive golem. Peng! The sound wave's power erupted and instantly sent the golem flying, even blowing a dent in the massive being's chest. Now that the golem advanced into the flower blossom tier, the power of the sound waves it released naturally increased, and it was also kneaded together, exploding on one point, which was even scarier. Ling Han smiled slightly and said, "Blockhead, you convinced yet?" The massive golem got up. The shattered rocks immediately flew towards its chest as if it was made of water, quickly recovering too as it was not even an injury could be seen. It stared fiercely at Ling Han, and Shio launched itself once again, attacking towards Ling Han. Ling Han casually moved his fingers. This powerful opponent who could put up a fight against him at the spiritual pedestal tier had no power to retaliate at all even though it advanced into the flower blossom tier. The massive golem was truly tough as nails. No matter how Ling Han tormented it, shattering it into thousands of pieces and stopping it from recovering, it wouldn't surrender. Every time Ling Han released it, it would attack at Ling Han fiercely. Ling Han couldn't help but lose his patience. Just how long would this continue for? Let me. Small Tower appeared and swayed gently. Pa. A scene that made Ling Han's eyes drop out appeared. The massive golem actually knelt down facing the Small Tower. It was clearly a golem, but Ling Han actually saw the sincerity on its face. What the heck? If he'd known Small Tower was so kick*ss, he'd have let it take the matter. Ling Han knew that a being birthed by the earth like the rock spirit had absolutely no fear of death, and for them, death was only returning to heaven and earth. They were proud because they were birthed by heaven and earth, standing high above and looking down on the masses. So no matter how Ling Han suppressed it, it would only incite the anger and unyieldingness of the rock spirit. However, Small Tower's level of life was far beyond the rock spirit's, as if born a king, so the rock spirit could only kneel upon seeing Small Tower. Small Tower trembled slightly and emitted wave after wave, while the rock spirit nodded repeatedly, as if the two were communicating. After a while, the massive golem got up and walked obediently to Ling Han's side, rubbing Ling Han's shoulder with its head like a dog. The corner of Ling Han's mouth twitched. The wild and intractable large fellow earlier was obedient like a dog right now, making him somewhat unable to accept it. Master. The golem telepathically sent a divine sense message. The rock spirit was the same as the fire spirit, unable to open its mouth to speak, but they didn't need to, since they could inherently use telepathic thoughts, crossing the language barrier. Ling Han laughed and said to Small Tower, "What did you say to it that made it so obedient?" "I told it that you're my master, so naturally it's master too," Small Tower said indifferently. "That easy." Ling Han sighed with all sorts of feelings. Black Tower was 2 kick *SS, subduing a flower blossom tier rock spirit that easily. If it were someone else, even if a shattering void tier warrior came, it would be useless. At most they could smash the rock spirit into bits and pieces, but not subdue it. "Master, hungry, eat, stones." The massive golem sent Ling Han another thought. Crap, why'd he get another chowhound? Ling Han palmed his forehead. This big fellow shouldn't be as gluttonous as Hunyo, and should be like strange fire. Eating was a necessity to strengthen itself. Strange fires could devour other strange fires to advance itself, while rock spirits devoured other rock spirits. He immediately thought of heavenly luckstone, which was also a rare stone birthed by heaven and earth, but he hurriedly shook his head. This thing could foster a genius, and giving it to the rock spirit to devour would be too much of a waste. There were many rare stones in the world. Ling Han nodded and said, "Follow a boss like me, there'll definitely be rocks." The massive golem smiled simple-mindedly, foolish like a rash fellow. Ling Han looked at the golem and suddenly had an idea. He hurriedly said, "You can change your body as you wish." "Oh, right, first I'll have to give you a name. There's already Small Tower and Small Fire, you'll be called Small Rock." The massive golem naturally wouldn't be against it, simply nodding its head and sending a thought of approval. Ling Han had it raise 36 pillars on top of its head. They were very short, only the length of a finger. The massive golem didn't know why, but simply did so obediently without asking. It was as if it had suddenly grown hair. It works. Ling Han sent it another thought, having it change the locations of the pillars, and forming a mysterious pattern. It wasn't that Ling Han was doing it for fun. Earlier, he suddenly thought that since the rock spirit's body was extremely solid, only a bit inferior to rare metals of the same tier, would it work if he carved the heavenly thunder dipper formation on it? This was an endeavor, and if it worked, he would carve 6th tier formations and 7th tier formations on it in the future. Chapter 467, A Special Formation. Chapter 467, A Special Formation. Reverie _ Ling Han was a man of action, doing what he thought of. He immediately carved formation patterns on the massive golem's hair, and these 36 strands of hair were the formation eyes. It had been quite a few days since he received Tianju Thunderstar Array. He had long figured out the formation patterns, but lacked the materials to form it. Now a large piece of material was placed in front of him, instantly making him eager to give it a try. He had already carved the formation patterns on rocks earlier, so it was now a piece of cake. After advancing into the spiritual pedestal tier, his divine sense also increased by a whole lot, so he could carve 3 formation patterns in one go now. After resting for 5 to 6 hours, he could carve 3 more formation patterns. Calculating in this way, he could carve 10 or so formation patterns in a day, and in less than 4 days, he created all 36 formation eyes. Inside the Black Tower, there wasn't the Tao of heaven and earth. Ling Han summoned the massive golem and said, "Unleash formation eyes." Seng, 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 Pillars rose from the top of the massive golem's head, forming a formation, and instantly, the formation patterns lit up and gathered the power of heaven and earth as the entire formation became woven with white lightning. The massive golem fired a punch. Z, 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 the flashes of lightning were also fired out. Its prowess was impossible and terrifyingly shocking. Ha 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 ha. Ling Han guffawed, appearing extremely satisfied. This was truly a moving formation. He stroked his chin as he thought of the formation patterns on Yin Hong's body, forming an astounding defensive effect which blocked even Hunyo's attacks. This proved that the human body could also act as formation eyes, and his sudden idea was also inspired by this. I've already cultivated to iron sheet body and the toughness of my physique is comparable to rare metals of the same tier, so I should also be able to tolerate the power of heaven and earth drawn in by the formation patterns, as long as the formation's tier doesn't surpass my tier, Ling Han said pensively. If he could carve formation patterns like that of Yin Hong, his defensive power could increase another level. Having stayed here for 4 days, it's time to depart. Ling Han stored the massive golem inside the Black Tower. It was a lot easier to deal with now since the massive golem was loyal to him like a dog, so it naturally wouldn't resist his divine sense. Ling Han advanced with Guang Yuan and Li Sai-chan. They actually didn't know where to go, but anyway, they'd move along first. This wasn't a real world. There were clouds covering the skies, there was also the difference of day and night, which was the change of light and dark, but there was neither a sun nor a moon. The three walked for a while, and the wilderness was already behind them. A vast plain appeared in front, and the carpet of grasses covered the insteps of their feet. Gentle winds breezed by, making them feel at ease. Wait, Ling Han suddenly said. He walked forward a few steps and parted the grass with his feet, immediately showing bones with traces of blood. Guang Yuan also walked over. After examining for a while, he said, "This is a human collarbone." Ling Han nodded and said, "It should be of a martial artist who entered, but if the injury was man-made, it wouldn't possibly just leave a piece of bone. Moreover, by the looks of the cracks, it seemed to be forcefully gnawed off by sharp teeth." Beasts, the three of them concluded at the same time. Why wasn't there any before? Li Sai-chan was somewhat puzzled. Ling Han pondered, then said, "The territory earlier was small rocks, so beasts didn't dare to intrude. From this, it can be confirmed that this beast or beast pack probably doesn't rival small rock." Li Sai-chan and Guang Yuan didn't dare to be careless. The rock spirit was at the 9th layer of the spiritual pedestal tier before, and only Ling Han could care less about it. One of them was at the 9th layer of the spiritual ocean tier, and the other just entered the gushing spring tier, far from the rock spirit's previous power. They continued to advance, and after another stretch of road, a foul wind suddenly swept by. A beast's den. Ling Han immediately said and leapt out. After a few leaps and landings, he found a barren land on the field of grass and dug a hole. The foul smell came from within. Seeming to hear Ling Han's voice, a beast wormed out of the hole. It was just 3 feet long, dusky all over, and somewhat like a wolf, but its mouth was flat as if a duck's. Flat-mouthed vicious mongoose. Ling Han revealed a smile. The leader of vicious mongooses could have king-tier bloodline, which is greatly tonic. Even a normal vicious mongoose was in the spiritual ocean tier. Breeding it in the Black Tower to eat later on, it would definitely be tasty enough to make one drool. "Sai-chan, you go back first," Ling Han said and waved at Li Sai-chan, sending her into the Black Tower. "Master Han, then I'll go fight first." Guang Yuan shouted loudly and charged out. Although he was at the 9th layer of the spiritual ocean tier, he advanced into the spiritual pedestal tier before and also received Ling Han's pointers. Learning War Elephant Fist, his battle prowess was quite out of the ordinary amongst spiritual ocean tier warriors. However, this was a beast den. Vicious mongoose wormed out one after another, and at least several dozen of them were at the spiritual ocean tier. The last few were at the spiritual pedestal tier and had a special divine light. On their foreheads was a pattern that emitted an ominous glare. Ling Han smiled slightly and said, "Old brother Guang, all the spiritual ocean tier beasts will be up to you, and I'll be responsible for the few spiritual pedestal tier ones. But, don't you kill them, these will be our delicious meals afterward." "Master Han, this request is somewhat high." Guang Yuan launched attacks while complaining to Ling Han. There were at least 4 vicious mongooses that reached the 9th layer of the spiritual ocean tier. It was somewhat difficult for him to win, let alone subdue them without hurting them. Ling Han laughed and said, "Can't do it. I'll try my best." Guang Yuan clenched his teeth and raised both fists, attacking the vicious mongooses. The few spiritual pedestal tier vicious mongooses wanted to go up to support, but Ling Han blocked them. "Your opponent is me," Ling Han said smilingly and casually threw a few punches. Peng, 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 these vicious mongoose were beaten down. Within the spiritual pedestal tier, there really were very few existences that could fight against Ling Han. He stored these vicious mongooses inside the Black Tower, then watched the battle between Guang Yuan and the other vicious mongooses. Chem. He was slightly startled, feeling a shred of a dangerous presence, and couldn't help but turn around, noticing an old vicious mongoose wormed out the hole. The edges of its hair had already turned grayish-white, but it emitted a presence that made Ling Han not dare to be careless. As expected, a king tier. Ling Han's eyes lit up. This was an old vicious mongoose at the 9th layer of the spiritual pedestal tier. Despite its apparent strength, possessing king tier bloodline made it different. Its battle prowess far surpassed the normal 9th layer of the spiritual pedestal tier. However, it was a king against a king. Ling Han naturally wouldn't be at all frightened, smiling as he said, "Old brother Guang, you're just about to charge into the spiritual pedestal tier once again. This king tier beast just happens to be able to aid you in making this step." "Much obliged, Master Han." Guang Yuan was exulted. Charging into a great tier naturally needed the support of a huge amount of energy, or else one could only accumulate through time and then form an explosive burst, charging through in one go. However, this took a lot of time, and second, it might not succeed. However, a king tier beast would make it different. The blood and flesh essence were like treasured medicine, and could definitely provide enough energy support. Chapter 468, Bone Patterns. Chapter 468, Bone Patterns. Reverie _ The old vicious mongoose appeared extremely furious. These 2 humans not only snatched its juniors, but also wanted to eat it, truly having no idea of death. It was a king amongst beasts. Ling Han didn't want to waste time and exploded with all his strength right away, unleashing the demon birth sword and thrusting it at the old vicious mongoose. The old vicious mongoose was extremely intrepid. A king tier meant standing at the peak of this tier and represented invincibility. The vein-like lines on its forehead lit up as it leapt out extremely quickly, and in a flash appeared before Ling Han's chest, opening its mouth and biting at Ling Han's throat. "Certainly quite fast." Ling Han smiled slightly and raised his hand, blocking the old vicious mongoose's sharp teeth. In terms of speed, the old vicious mongoose was fast, but it wasn't at all comparable to Hu Niu. With a snap, the old vicious mongoose bit Ling Han's palm, wanting to bite off this human's arm. However, as it bit down, only countless sparks burst forth. It couldn't help but be shocked. Was this guy actually a human? How come his palm was so solid? It clearly didn't feel the fluctuations of origin power, so it was simply the defense of Ling Han's flesh. What the FCK? Its teeth were even loosened. Ling Han countered with a punch, and the old vicious mongoose was instantly sent flying. He was slightly startled as he said, "It actually didn't die." As expected of a king tier beast, taking Ling Han's punch right on without dying, the old vicious mongoose burst into anger. What did king tier represent? It was invincible in this tier. And when a king encountered another king, then victory depended on whose tier was higher. Ling Han was only at the 1st layer of the spiritual pedestal tier, while it was 9th tier, obviously having the absolute advantage. However, it lost, which made it extremely out of sorts. Moreover, Ling Han actually wanted to kill it with one punch, feeling sour from not killing it in an instant. Shati, it was regarded with such contempt. The old vicious mongoose attacked again and opened its mouth, spitting out 9 flashes of airblades that swept towards Ling Han. As expected of a king amongst beasts, cultivating 9 flashes of qi. Ling Han complimented. A king amongst beasts originally had surprising battle prowess, and on top of the qi that only kings amongst martial artists could form, its battle prowess was naturally even more frightening. Shio, 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 9 flashes of airblades flew in unison, violently slashing at Ling Han. Each airblade had complex vein-like patterns winnowing, emitting an ancient and grand presence. Ling Han was slightly startled. These vein-like patterns made even him feel nervous, showing that it was no trivial thing. He didn't dare to be careless and pushed out the demon birth sword, greeting the airblades. With a slash of a sword, 9 flashes of sword chi also flew in unison. When the sword chi met the airblades, both were annihilated. Ling Han was shocked again by the terrifying martial intent. The sword chi he used the demon birth sword to fire out only tied with the airblades his opponent spat out. Was this the true strength of a king amongst beasts? Haha, come fight. Ling Han's fighting spirit soared. Earlier, he knew that the old vicious mongoose was a king amongst beasts and was still absent-minded, seeing it as a minion, but after this attack, he finally took it seriously. He waved the sword and used a new sword technique, Thunder Fire Sword technique. This was an earth-grade technique that could only be cultivated at the spiritual pedestal tier, replacing the phasing out 4 seasons sword technique. After so many days, he had already grasped this sword technique proficiently, and as the long sword was swung, sounds of thunderstorm rumbled and raging flames burned. He had a 5-element spirit base, and his origin power could be converted into any of the 5 elements, so there was naturally fire in this sword technique. However, he didn't cultivate thunder-type arts, so he could only rely on sword intent to accumulate the thunder element within heaven and earth to form the thunderstorm. The power of it naturally decreased a bit. Earth-grade techniques were powerful. Compounded with the sharpness of a 10th-tier spirit tool, Ling Han naturally took the high ground. He gave a long holler and the 10th flash of sword chi shot out, instantly increasing his might sharply. 10 flashes of sword chi versus 9 flashes, this was an inherent difference in quality. Against such might, the old vicious mongoose naturally retreated one step after another. It certainly was a powerful king, but unfortunately, it encountered someone even more freakish, so it could only swallow the bitter fruit of defeat. After 100 more moves, Ling Han killed the old vicious mongoose. He hurriedly took the old vicious mongoose's corpse inside the Black Tower. This was a king amongst beasts, wasting even a drop of blood was a huge loss. Ling Han processed it skillfully, peeling off its skin and breaking its bones ever so swiftly. Before, he was definitely not so practiced, but after picking up the chowhound Hu Nyo, he became quite agile in sorting out food. What? He found an unusual spot on the old vicious mongoose's cranium. There was a flower pattern on it, extremely complex. This is very similar to the vein-like patterns on the airblade it's fired out. Ling Han recalled as he said, precisely because it was blessed by such martial intent, the airblades were able to rival the sword chi fired out by Demon Birth Sword. Could it possibly be due to this piece of its skull? He was a heaven-tier elite in his former life anyhow, and in the depths of historic sites, he encountered quite a few powerful beasts, lacking opponents that were king-tier. However, he'd never discovered one with bone patterns on its bones. He looked closely again and his spirit was instantly attracted by the pattern on the bones. The static patterns seemed to come alive, wriggling and changing as if expounding the Tao of heaven and earth. Got a real treasure. Ling Han felt a rush of excitement. He was certain that additional power of the old vicious mongoose's airblades came from the bone patterns. If he could thoroughly grasp it, then the chi he fired out would increase drastically in quality. Almost forgot Guang Yuan. He flashed out of the Black Tower and saw that Guang Yuan was still battling fiercely with the other vicious mongooses. He was injured at least in a dozen places, but on the side lay several mongooses not dead, but unconscious. If it weren't so, being able to kill his opponents, Guang Yuan definitely wouldn't be so in such a tight corner. However, to capture an opponent alive and to kill an opponent were 2 tasks definitely on different levels of difficulty. Ling Han nodded inwardly. Guang Yuan's battle prowess increased a lot. Cultivating the spiritual ocean tier again wasn't a bad thing for him before. He broke through to the spiritual pedestal tier in a rush and his foundation wasn't particularly firm. Walking the old route again, he had the experience to correct previous mistakes, and secondly, he wasn't in a rush to charge into the spiritual pedestal tier and could firmly solidify his foundation. In another half hour or so, Guang Yuan finally seized the remaining vicious mongooses, and then let out a bright laughter. Master Han, thankfully, I accomplished the mission. Ling Han nodded and said, go recover origin power. After you adjust to your peak state, charge at the spiritual pedestal tier. The spiritual chi here is extremely abundant and will be of great help in breaking through. I'll refine out the blood and flesh essence from the old vicious mongoose to aid you in your final accumulation. Thank you, Master Han, for your help, Guang Yuan said gratefully. If he followed another person, who would be willing to spend a king tier's beast's blood and flesh essence on a subordinate? Just from this point, he was willing to plunge into raging fire and boiling water for Ling Han. Chapter 469, Fishing. Chapter 469, Fishing. Reverie _ Ling Han boiled the old vicious mongoose and let Guang Yuan have the majority of the essence, while he and Li Sai-chan ate a small portion. Afterwards, Guang Yuan immediately cultivated in seclusion again to charge at the spiritual pedestal tier, while Ling Han and Li Sai-chan also received a good deal of benefits as they began to charge at the barrier of a small tier each. The higher the tier, the more solid the barrier of a small tier was, not easily broken through. It was alright below the flower blossom tier, but later, each small tier would be as hard to break through as if a large tier, needing the support of worldly treasures and medicinal pills. It could be said that before the flower blossom tier, the effect of medicinal pills was to help martial artists quickly complete the accumulation of origin power, and from the flower blossom tier onwards, the importance of medicinal pills further increased, having the effect of helping one break through the shackles of a tier. The blood and flesh of a king tier beast could be seen as a treasured medicine of the same tier, so the effect naturally worked like a charm, helping the three accumulate origin power to charge into a higher tier. After 2 hours, Ling Han was the first to complete a breakthrough, advancing into the second layer of the spiritual pedestal tier. Following him was Li Sai-chan, who reached the third layer of the gushing spring tier. Although that wasn't high, with her talent in martial arts, cultivation, and age, she could be counted as a genius back in Rain Country. Taking advantage of the time while Guang Yuan was breaking past the threshold, Ling Han took out the piece of bone branded with the pattern. It was clearly just a bone pattern, which seemed to be formed naturally, but it gave Ling Han a profound feeling, as if it was some sort of extremely advanced art shown in the form of a pattern. He diligently tried to figure it out. The bone pattern evolved continuously within his consciousness extremely complexly. I have to grasp it, this'll raise my battle prowess by a great deal, Ling Han said. Saying so was easy, but doing it was too hard. Other than indestructible heaven scroll, it was the first time Ling Han encountered an art that he couldn't immediately comprehend, making him both surprised and even more interested. The old vicious mongoose was only at the spiritual pedestal tier, yet it could grasp the bone patterns, so was he inferior to a beast? 2 days passed. Guang Yuan finally came out of seclusion and returned to the spiritual pedestal tier. Congrats, big brother Guang, Li Sai-chan said sweetly. Her indifference was only aimed at outsiders. Guang Yuan was overcome with joy. He never would have thought that only after half a year, he would return to the spiritual pedestal tier, and be even more powerful. If he encountered Duan Zhengji again, he was certain that he could kill the other with his own abilities. Thank you, young Master Han, for your help, he said to Ling Han, half kneeling. Ling Han nodded and stored away the old vicious mongoose's skull. In 2 days' time, he couldn't comprehend the bone patterns, so his mood soured. They set out. An indistinct pillar of light soaring into the sky could be seen in the distance, as if guiding their path. Since none of them knew where to go, they decided they might as well walk towards that direction. After half a day, a lake appeared in front of them. Even without approaching it, a terrifying chill assaulted them, making their blood feel like it was being frozen. At least 100 people surrounded the side of the lake. They were actually fishing. These people came in not long ago and were definitely not natives of this world. It was unheard of that there would be locals here. Ling Han's gaze swept by and saw his older cousin Yu Kai-yu. This guy was taking a massive net and waving it towards the lake, then drawing it up. His upper body was bare to the waist, revealing sturdy muscles. Was he perhaps showing off? There were so many people fishing, which meant the fish here were definitely not ordinary. Ling Han walked over and set off origin power, resisting the chill. Fortunately, although the chill was thorough to the bones, it was still resistible as long as one reached the element-gathering tier. Apparently, the chill came from the lake, but the surface of the water was marked with ripples but no sign of freezing over, appearing extremely strange. Master Ling. My respects to Master Ling. Ling Han walked over. Quite a few people paid respects to him, and of course, there was a minority that ignored him, thinking that they had no requests for Ling Han to refine pills, so was it worthwhile to bootlick? It was still mainly because Ling Han was too young, making people envious. Otherwise, if he looked like an 80 or 90 years old man, it was guaranteed that the youngsters here would give him face. It couldn't be helped that youngsters were proud and arrogant and could only accept lowering their heads to the older generation. Ling Han was so young, even younger than most of the people here, naturally making people envious and unconvinced. Ling Han wasn't so idle as to make everyone be sincerely convinced about him. He smiled and nodded, asking someone, "What fish are you catching here?" "Absolute cold ice heartfish," the person said, then suddenly started, and pulled on the bamboo pole, fishing up a foot-long white fish. Its stomach was transparent white and its insides could clearly be seen, as if layers of ice. The person was exalted, and said while smiling, "Master Ling is truly naturally lucky. Once you came, I fished up this one. This is also the first absolute cold ice heartfish I fished up in 3 days." Inside Ling Han's mind, the information on absolute cold ice fish was immediately brought up. It was known as a treasured medicine amongst fish, greatly tonic especially for martial artists, because it could recover chi and blood, increase origin power, and was more effective than most medicinal pills. Because this was a naturally formed being, eating it wouldn't cause one to develop any drug resistance, nor did it hold any medicinal pill poison of sorts. It could be eaten as much as one wanted. At most, for one with a high tier, it would simply take more absolute cold ice heartfish to have an apparent effect. No one went into the water to fish because the water temperature was too cold. Even if spiritual pedestal tier warriors went into the water, it wouldn't take much time for them to be frozen into a block of ice. Ling Han was instantly enthused as he said to Guang Yuan and Li Sai-chan, "Let's also fish." There were almost all kinds of materials inside the Black Tower, and very soon, the three of them all had a fishing kit. The fishing line that Ling Han used was formed by blood-sucking origin gold, and he then took out a bunch of ginsengs from the Black Tower. This was bait. The absolute cold ice heartfish itself was a super tonic medicine, so it also loved to eat spirit medicine. This would be the best bait. However, spirit medicine was extremely precious, so how many people here could take out a second tier or third tier spirit medicine? Anything higher they probably didn't have, and even if they did, how much would they have? Precisely so, everyone's gains were so little. The bait wasn't very effective, so why would the absolute cold ice heartfish take the bait? What Ling Han lacked least was spirit medicine, and he definitely didn't lack those below the 5th tier. He took out 100-year-old ginsengs, and all were at least 100-year-old. It wasn't that he didn't have 1,000-year-old ones, but that it was too wasteful to use it for fishing. Ling Han threw some ginseng to Guang Yuan and Li Sai-chan while everyone looked at these stalks of ginsengs, which were thick as an arm, being thrown around like carrots. Their faces involuntarily twitched. Oh, envy, and Hatehe was too wealthy. Ling Han coiled the ginseng with blood-sucking origin gold, flung it casually, and it landed at the center of the lake, causing slight ripples. Chapter 470, Killing Spree. Chapter 470, Killing Spree. Reverie _ In a short while, Ling Han revealed a smile as his right hand shook, immediately pulling back blood-sucking origin gold. Shua, a large fish, was pulled out of the water, 2 feet long and still whipping its tail vigorously. Compared to other people's baits, the 100-year-old ginseng's attractiveness was naturally far greater, and other people's fishing lines couldn't extend to the lake center. Only Ling Han's could, so it was a large one right off the bat. Ling Han suddenly had an idea and said to Small Tower, "The growth of spirit grasses can be sped up inside the Black Tower. Then can these fish that require harsh environments be raised? If so, he wouldn't eat them. Raising all these fish inside would be equivalent to another treasure." "No," Small Tower immediately said. Ling Han couldn't help but be disappointed. He would have to fish up as much as possible, and the ones he couldn't finish would be made into dried fish. All of it would be taken away. He changed to another ginseng and threw the line into the lake's center. In a short while, there was a harvest again. Because the bait was outstanding, even Guang Yuan and Li Sai Chan frequently had gains. However, since they fished by the lakeside, the fish that were caught weren't large, about a foot long and incomparable to what Ling Han caught. Even so, the other martial artists fishing by the lakeside already had gazes full of desire, wishing they could steal some. However, facing a heaven-grade alchemist, who dared to act recklessly? If there wasn't anyone else here though, it would be alright. Who would know if they were killed? There was another problem. Ling Han's battle prowess was extremely astonishing, and although he didn't take the field in the prodigy battle, how terrifying was 20 stars spiritual infant tier battle prowess? Even if it were with the assistance of a spirit tool, one had to have a roughly similar spirit tool to resist, right? Therefore, they could only drool secretly by the side. However, there were always those who were restless. If I can't steal from you, and can't get more than you, who doesn't know how to cause trouble? The lake rippled as several people were throwing stones inside the lake, instantly startling the school of fish into running towards the lake bed. Ling Han instantly frowned and said to Guang Yuan, "Drive those people away." "Yes, Master Han." Guang Yuan immediately stood up, out for a kill. Returning to the spiritual pedestal tier, he was just itching to fight. He took large strides over, killing intent overflowing. The expression of the nearest troublemaker instantly changed as he yelled towards Guang Yuan, "What are you trying to do? Making you piss off." Guang Yuan attacked, firing a punch. 5 war elephants surged out, firing at the person. "Damn it." The person hurriedly parried whilst shouting loudly, "Master Ling, you're too high-handed, this lake isn't yours, why are you letting your subordinate assault me? You're trying to take the place all for yourself." "Quite right, too high-handed. Worldly treasures naturally belong to the people of the world, what are you trying to do?" Someone chimed in, naturally being one of the other troublemakers. "Driving people away at every turn, that's too much." More troublemakers leapt out and approached Guang Yuan. They naturally didn't dare to do anything to Ling Han, who was a heaven-grade alchemist, but Guang Yuan was different, only a dog of a heaven-grade alchemist. A dog, well, slaughtering it was no big deal, because they were all came from large sects and had the self-assurance. Just like Yarrow Hui you not caring about earth-grade alchemist, although these people weren't wild to that degree, the possibility of them needing to request a heaven-grade alchemist was almost zero, so why should they give him face? Mainly, they were still young and arrogant, while Ling Han was too young, making them envious. They gave Ling Han a great unwarranted burden. First, standing firm with reason, even if Ling Han looked for trouble at their sects in the future, they could be justified and confident. After all, in the North region, what difference was there between a heaven-grade alchemist and an earth-grade one? Sects respected high-tier alchemists, but definitely wouldn't take them at their word. Guang Yuan's battle prowess was very strong, but he only just entered the spiritual pedestal tier after all. The breakthrough this time was returning to spiritual pedestal tier, and couldn't bring him the benefits from the heavenly luckstone, so his battle prowess was about 4 stars. Faced with the elite disciples of these large sects, 1 or 2 was alright, but any more, he could no longer resist. Under the surrounded attacks of 6 people, Guang Yuan was in imminent danger. The non-troublemakers watched the show by the side. Ling Han was too young, yet they had to pay respects to such a youngster and call him master. They were naturally annoyed on the inside, only too glad to enjoy the show. Ling Han's gaze turned cold as he stood up abruptly, walking towards the fray. "Master Ling, are you going to personally intervene?" a troublemaker said in a mocking tone. He wasn't a figure on the prodigy roll, but was extremely conceited and didn't believe that Ling Han once fired out battle prowess of 20 stars spiritual infant tier, thinking that someone intentionally lied in order to praise Ling Han. Ling Han revealed a cold smile and said, "Since you guys aren't willing to get lost, then you can all stay here." His right hand shook and the demon birth sword was unleashed. With a slash, the troublemaker's head immediately flew. Blood started spilling violently out of the neck, rushing to a foot high before falling back down. The head fell on the ground with an expression of disbelief still on the face, its owner never expecting that Ling Han would suddenly kill him. He was a disciple of the Blood Flame Valley, the strongest sect from the North region, and all those who attacked him had to think before they acted. The gory slaughter instantly intimidated everyone. Killing a disciple of the Blood Flame Valley without hesitation, this meant that Ling Han had no qualms at all. Hiss, could a heaven-grade alchemist really be so willful? Ling Han walked towards Guang Yuan. His killing intent overflowed, making the 6 troublemakers feel pressure all at once as they retreated involuntarily. However, it was too late as Ling Han struck, 6 flashes of sword chi slashing towards the 6 people. Pu, 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 pu. The 6 people had no power to resist at all and were instantly sliced into 2. The severed limbs and heads spilled over, blood everywhere. Everyone was terrified. The status of alchemists was beyond the norm, and a large part of that reason was because they didn't take part in dispute of interest with martial artists, so they could stay beyond the norm. Otherwise, with contention came conflict. Could they be beyond the norm? It was unheard of for an alchemist to take part in competing for treasures. Because alchemists knew why their status was beyond the norm, they isolated themselves from contention of benefits. However, Ling Han was without restraint, not only entering the mystery realm, but also killing resolutely and mercilessly, making people frightened. The 7 troublemakers were executed. Ling Han sheathed his sword and stared coldly at the surrounding people before returning to the original position, continuing to fish. He could pretend nothing happened, but the other people couldn't. Those 7 corpses with severed heads and heads still lay there. Who could pretend not to see? Some people began to shiver in fear that Ling Han's murderous side would erupt, killing them all to do away with witnesses. These people left quietly, but some people were unwilling to give up on the absolute cold ice fish, still fishing. Chapter 471 – A Great Beast Appears. Chapter 471 – A Great Beast Appears. Reverie _ With one forenoon, Ling Han already fished up over 100 absolute cold ice heart fish. On top of Li Sai Chan and Guang Yuan's gains, their total reached 150, which was more than the total gain of everyone at the scene. This was precisely the principle of good tools being necessary for the successful execution of a job. When it was afternoon, Ling Han raised a bonfire and began to boil these treasured fish. 4 were roasted, and 4 were made into soup. Ling Han also added several spirit medicines. As it was boiling, the alluring fragrance spread out, making people drool. Moreover, this wasn't just the fragrance, because in the furnace appeared flashes of brilliance that soared into the sky, an amazing sight. It was the greatly tonic food that attracted the spirit chi of heaven and earth, forming a distinct sight. Everyone looked on enviously and hurriedly began boiling for themselves. However, they didn't have any spirit medicine to add in, so the soup they made was only light soup and couldn't be compared to Ling Han's pot at all. Ling Han looked at Yu Kai-yu and suddenly said, "Brother Yu, join us for a meal?" Yu Kai-yu was startled, never thinking that Ling Han would actually open up to invite him. After being startled momentarily, he pointed at himself and said, "Me? What? Brother, you won't give me face?" Ling Han said smilingly, "I hear you and old brother Guang have had a friendly relationship." Yu Kai-yu naturally recognized Guang Yuan. Back then, the 3 of them entered the subsect of the Thousand Corpse sect in Seaflow City, forming a friendship through battle. However, back then the other person was Han Lin, and not Ling Han, so Yu Kai-yu didn't dare to approach. Ling Han was a heaven-grade alchemist after all. Ha ha ha, receiving Master Ling's invitation, how could I dare not give face? He took large strides over, and sat on the ground. The 4 of them each took a corner. Ling Han took out plates. It was exactly 1 grilled fish and a bowl of fish soup for each person. Inside the fish soup, neither the fish nor the spirit medicine could be seen, all stewed as the essence all entered the soup, which now appeared snow-white. Yu Kai-yu's expression was somewhat strange. 4 roasted fish, could Ling Han already have had the idea of inviting him? "Here, don't be a stranger." Ling Han grabbed a roasted fish and started to eat. Li Sai Chan and Guang Yuan naturally wouldn't hesitate. Those who have eaten with Hunyo naturally formed the habit of eating quickly, or else there definitely would be no food to eat. This was a hard-learned lesson. Yu Kai-yu was bold and uninhibited in character, immediately tossing away formalities as he began to gobble down. Wonderful! Wonderful! Wonderful, he immediately praised greatly. Big fish are quite different. Not only the texture of the meat is more succulent, and the essence of the treasured medicine is also richer. I guess if I ate a dozen, I could improve by one small tier. Guang Yuan also nodded. This was of immense help to him. Li Sai-chan couldn't speak at all, as multicolored light surged out endlessly from her exquisite body. The meat and treasured medicine had already come into effect and were in the process of drastically increasing her cultivation. Her breakthrough was imminent. It was mainly because her tier was too low. Spiritual pedestal tier warriors needed dozen fishes to advance, but for a gushing spring tier, it was truly one bite for a small tier. Ling Han was extremely pleased. He was going to save some dried fish for Ling Dongxing. Once Ling Dongxing's spirit base was repaired, it could be imagined that his cultivation would have a shockingly explosive growth. Reaching the 9th layer of the spiritual pedestal tier in 3 years definitely wasn't a dream. Li Sai-chan couldn't even eat a second bite, and immediately sat on the ground to adjust, preparing to charge towards the 4th layer of the gushing spring tier. Yu Kaiyu felt it strange. Only young geniuses could enter, and young was in terms of tier to age. 100-year-old spiritual infant tier definitely belonged under the young. However, Li Sai-chan was only at the gushing spring tier, and her age was roughly 20. Such a genius could be seen anywhere, so how did she qualify to enter the mystery realm? However, as he drank the fish soup and ate the roasted fish, he soon forgot this topic. After he finished eating, he immediately sat cross-legged to adjust so as to refine the benefits inside his body as quickly as possible for it to truly be absorbed by the body. Guang Yuan also did the same. He had just broken through and needed the nourishment of such treasures. Only Ling Han was depressed. His spiritual pedestal was built too large, so while Guang Yuan and Yu Kaiyu only needed a dozen fish to advance 1 layer, he probably needed several hundred. Moreover, this was only the 2nd layer of the spiritual pedestal tier. When it was 5th layer, or after the 8th layer, who knew how much this amount would increase by? So, all he had to do was fish some more. Ling Han continued to boil absolute cold ice heart fish. He prepared to turn himself into a chowhound, angling whilst eating fish. The fish here were definitely stupid. With no one fishing for hundreds of years, they kept coming one after another even after several hundreds of their pals disappeared, complying with an old saying, humans died in pursuit of wealth, and birds died in pursuit of food. At night, Ling Han already fished up over 300 absolute cold ice heart fish, and after slaughtering them, he stored them inside the Black Tower, making sure to lock the essence component and prevent it from running off. A night passed, and Ling Han continued to fish on the 2nd day, but after a day, his harvest was much less compared to the previous day, only 200 or so. It was unclear whether these fish got smarter, or there was a shortage of the entire population. Another day passed. Ling Han's harvests further decreased on the 3rd day, with only a little over 100. Everyone shook their heads. This lake might be small, but the amount of absolute cold ice heartfish it could support was limited. There was just about that much. Hong, long, a whirlpool suddenly formed at the lake's center. Originally, quite a few people already planned to leave, but as they saw this scene, they couldn't help but be surprised. Was some treasure about to come into the world? This wasn't impossible. Could a place where absolute cold ice heartfish could live be an ordinary place? The whirlpool spun fiercely and grew larger and larger. Hong, a surprising scene appeared as a strange creature emerged from the whirlpool. It had the head of a lion, but the body of a crocodile. It also had 6 legs and grew a pair of eagle wings on its back. Its entire body's length was about 3 feet or so. Now, this monster fluttered its eagle wings and flew towards the shore. Opening its wings, it emitted a terrifying presence. Everyone was terrified. This was a flower blossom tier beast. It was over. There were no flower blossom tier martial artists here, so how could they resist such a monster? Ling Han, however, revealed a pleasantly surprised expression. This beast emitted a presence far beyond normal flower blossom tier beasts, being no weaker than the gold-blooded demonic ape in the dark demon forest. A king tier creature, as expected of a mystery realm. He'd only entered for a few days and already encountered 2 king tier beasts. King tier beasts were equivalent to treasured medicine of the same tier, those of the highest quality at that. Now, they appeared one after another. Was it not a pleasant surprise? Besides, the rock spirit could also be considered to be of the king tier, and even stronger than normal king tier beasts because it was spirit of the 5 elements, birthed by heaven and earth. Run! It was unknown who first yelled out the word as everyone fled in disarray. Spiritual ocean tier and spiritual pedestal tier cultivators encountered a flower blossom tier being other than running. What else could they do? The beast fluttered its wings lightly, and instantly, a chilling wind formed ice blades, slashing towards everyone. There was the attack of a flower blossom tier king tier beast, so the power of it was naturally terrifying. Shua, 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 the ice blades struck. As long as they were close, without even hitting people, they lattered be frozen into a rod, and those who were directly hit ended up much worse, first frozen, then annihilated into pieces, no part of the corpse intact. So strong. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.